Okay, so Bastien is here. Hello, Bastien.
Sorry, I'm late.
This is now being recorded, everyone. Okay. This presentation is specifically for the Carlson School of Management. I assume all of you are with the Carlson School, yeah? Let's give it a hand. And after my presentation, you're going to hear from Jonathan Hadida with Hadida Tax Advisors, who's with us, and then we'll probably take a break after Jonathan, and then we're going to hear from Brian Dunhill of Dunhill Financial. We are real people on the ground in France doing real things related to money. And I assume that's what everyone's here talking about, right? Finance? Take it away. Hit the next. Just to give you a quick idea of who we are property consultants. We specifically work with North American clients. We think of ourselves as French property, the American way. And we do all of these various services, soup to nuts, anything related to someone moving over to France and wanting to either rent or make a purchase. And I've been doing this for about 20 years, not necessarily out of choice, but because it just kind of happened to me. Sometimes that's the best way your life happens, right? Just you get into a situation where you have a need and you fill it. But it's been an exciting ride. Go ahead. One of the reasons that we exist is that there's no multiple listing service. You guys know what an MLS is? Yeah? Okay. Basically, with an MLS, you put a property on the market in the United States and everyone has access to it at the same moment, which is not true here at all. There are 5,000 real estate agencies in Paris alone. So if you want to find a property, you literally have to go to every one of them. Or you have to go to a lot of different websites because there's no one place that aggregates all of the listings. So in effect, because of everything being different, right? Process, laws, language, culture, currency, everything, we find that North Americans really need some help, and that's how we ended up doing this. Well, okay, so what you need to know is that culturally speaking, France and the United States are diametrically opposed. And I'm going to give you just a very small speech about the difference between English law and Napoleonic Code. English law is based on what's forbidden, and Napoleonic Code is based on what's allowed. Now, that means that our legal systems are completely and absolutely opposite one another. So when it is forbidden with English law, you know what you can't do. You can't steal, you can't kill, you can't do this and the other, but everything else is possible, which is very out-of-the-box thinking. With Napoleonic Code, you have to follow the rules, because if you are not following the rules, anything outside of that is not allowed. So that's very in-the-box thinking. And as a result, because of this history, we have, there goes Angelique. Okay, sorry. It's no problem. Going back to the French Revolution, there is a huge aversion to money. Money is disgusting, despicable, not to be discussed in France. And so that difference really plays out in a lot of different ways. Maybe Bastien can probably speak to some of this. And understand that this is not a capitalist culture. This is a socialist democracy. You guys probably, coming from the United States, the word socialism is really taboo. But you have to understand what that really means. In a socialist democracy, the wealth is spread more evenly. There's a larger middle class. There's a smaller wealthy class. There's a smaller poor class. Because of it, France has a much bigger safety net than the United States. And that's why we have in France an amazing healthcare system, incredible educational system, and things that are considered rights, not privileges. So it's one reason all of us Americans living here are living here. Hit the next one. Lower and higher education, believe it or not, is free of charge. You can go to college here free of charge, except for maybe the cost of your books. 70% of your health care is covered under the French system, free of charge. Now you pay for it in taxation, but basically everyone has health care paid up to 70%. And the health care coverage, believe it or not, costs about 1/10 of what it does in the United States. Your employment is secure. You have a contract with an employer, and there's something called the CDI, which is long-term and déterminé, thank you. Which means that basically once you have a contract like that for employment, you are not getting fired. If you get fired, you will walk away with 2.5 years, 2/3 of your salary for 2.5 years. Yeah. Believe it or not. So because money is so private and so taboo, it's not cool to show off your wealth at all. It's very gauche to do that. It's not classy. Keep going. Nicolas Sarkozy, ex-president, was nicknamed the bling bling president because he did a little bit of showing off of his wealth, and they didn't like that very much. And now Emmanuel Macron, who has a finance background, which we as Americans think is really wonderful, they don't like him for that, believe it or not. They call him the president of the rich. I will say, though, that the younger generation tends to be more open-minded, maybe thanks to the internet, maybe thanks to the fact that we're a more global society. Would you agree with that, Bestia?
I don't like it.
No, I'm talking about being more open to money and investment. I think we're seeing the young people be a lot more open to that. Okay, so let's talk about currency. We're in euros. You've been spending euros, not dollars, right? Okay, so everyone know what an exchange rate is? Okay. So the difference, okay, between the US dollar and the euro, for example. Sorry. When you're buying or selling a currency, we tend to work with currency brokers, not with the banks. If you transfer money from dollars into euros using your bank, the bank makes a lot of money off that. They charge about 3% in the difference, what's called the spread, the difference between the buy and the sell rate. The currency brokers, because that's their business, will charge about 1% in the spread. So if you happen to, there are brochures and business cards of ours, and they're over there for you to take. If you go to my website, you'll see a list of currency brokers that we recommend. But there are, I don't know, Brian, how many currency brokers are there out there? Thousands.
New ones coming up every day.
Yes.
Not that many that are licensed properly.
Okay, that's another story. The rates change literally by the second. So when you're changing money, right, from dollars to euros or euros to dollars, either way, you could make or lose money depending on the moment that you make that exchange. And the currency brokers can do what's called a buy forward, so that you can lock in a rate, and they will lock that in for up to 2 years, and you only put down 10% until you actually transfer the money over. Now, see, this is something that's really important to my business, because people who are buying property are maybe transferring $500,000, €1 million, right, from dollars into euros, and it makes a big difference. Okay, 1 little percent can mean a huge difference. Okay. So this is just more about currency exchange, okay, some of which I've already talked about. I will say, though, that if you're taking small amounts of money out, it doesn't really pay necessarily to do a transfer. You guys have been using ATMs, maybe? Debit card, credit card? No?
Credit cards.
But on the credit card, you're going to pay a rate.
Usually it's about the current exchange rate.
Yeah, but with the credit card, it's a credit, so you could end up with additional fees, so you need to be careful. A debit card normally will come directly out of your bank account, but sometimes the banks also charge fees on that, so you just have to kind of be careful. But the easiest way to get euros is to literally go to an ATM and just extract it directly. Interestingly enough, France does not live on credit cards. They live on debit cards. There's only 1 or 2 real credit cards. Air France issues a credit card.
I never had one, so.
No, and I think the BHV and Galeries Lafayette offer a credit card, but the banks issue debit cards. They call them carte de crédit, but they're really debit cards, and that means the money comes directly out of the account. Some credit cards add foreign transaction fees. So if you're spending money here on your credit cards, you need to be careful that they're not adding foreign transaction fees to it. I work with Capital One, for example, and Capital One does not have foreign transaction fees. But this is not like information they post really large. You really have to dig into their documents to find out if they do or not. Okay. I think you went to, did you post that? Go back one. Okay, go next. It's funny, I think this is out of order, but it's okay. We're going to talk about it anyway. So expatriates like us, okay, we are used to doing online banking. And we can pay bills and transfer between accounts depending on the bank. The French banks do provide an online service, but there is a charge. That's why I think this is out of order, but go to the next one. Okay, it is out of order, but that's okay. So it's very difficult for an American in today's world to open a French bank account. Do you know why? FATCA. Everybody know about FATCA? No? Write this down. You need to know about this. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. It was signed by Barack Obama as part of the HIRE Act in 2010. And it places regulations on foreign financial institutions to report their U.S. customers. That sucks. Tell you why. Around the world, the banks don't want to do business with us. It's expensive for them, time-consuming, and a big pain in the butt. And because of it, they don't want to open bank accounts for us or give us mortgages. Okay, we are pariahs on the banking industry worldwide thanks to this. So this is really important for you guys to know when it comes to international banking, because we are battling this, and I know that Brian and Jonathan are both going to be able to talk about it. So because it's not so simple to open a bank account, we have relationships with banks that we've created so we can do this for our clients. We can make an appointment and open a bank account for them. But generally, you cannot walk into a bank and say, I want to open an account and I've got $1 million to put in it. And they're going to say, forget it, we don't care about your money. In fact, it's kind of funny. If you do go into a bank and you say, I've got all this money to put in your bank, they are going to so not like you. They don't care about, believe it or not, they don't care about your money. I've been told by the banks on many occasions that they don't make any money by keeping your money in their bank. And I know this makes no sense whatsoever. But according to them, the way they make money is by providing services. So they sell insurance and they sell, you know, phone subscriptions and all sorts of other things because they don't seem to care about the money you invest in their bank. Can you guys answer to this? Because I don't get it.
Oh, we used to get toasters when you opened a bank account in America. Now you get a shotgun. True story.
No, it is
Trevor
true.
Noah went on about
It is
that.
true. It's true. But like most things in France, it's all about creating a relationship. You have to have a relationship with these people.
Adrian, the banking system is not because of the government, the politics, the socialism, etc. It's purely based on interest rates. The Federal Reserve in the States has had higher interest rates for a longer period of time. We've had interest rates going in one direction since 1982. So they went down to next to zero, whereas we were negative here in France. Now, you guys are a bunch of finance students. Can you run a bank with negative interest rates?
No.
Very hard. So you have to have a ton of periphery services actually charging the fees. So if you're the bank, do you want deposits if you're basically having to pay for the deposits? Or basically giving a negative vary on that. No, it's very hard, so it's become a very different atmosphere. If we go to normal times where we have 4 to 5% interest rates on the short term for a long period of time, banking will become the same here in France.
But we don't really want that to happen, do we, Brian? So, okay, so we're going to leave it alone.
I wasn't talking about what you want.
Okay, so the other thing is that they really watch everything that goes in and out of the accounts. If I transfer a chunk of money over to buy a property or whatever, they are going to want to know why. And you cannot walk into a bank and say, I would like to get 2,000 euros cash out of my account. They do not keep cash in their banks, believe it or not. You have to make an appointment. Then they want to know what you're going to do with that cash, even though it's really just your business. As far as they're concerned, it's their business. So you have to be really careful when it comes to banking. So the banks do charge for the account. They charge differently. Their fees operate differently than in the US. They will even charge for online banking, but they won't charge for checks, for example. They will even charge for owning a carte bleue, which is your debit card. And you can't just bounce a check and the account goes into arrears. You bounce a check, you are in big trouble with the Banque de France. You go on a list and you can't do any business after that. So you do not want to ever go into the red. If you're going to wire funds from the US to France, you're going to need an international number. In the US, we use a routing number and which is the ABA, and your bank account. Here, it's an IBAN, an international banking number, that is a series of numbers, and they also use what's called a SWIFT code. So it's just a different system. In order to pay bills here, they love automatic debits. In fact, if you don't have what's called a RIB, a relevé d'identité bancaire, to give the phone company or the electric company, they will not open an account for you. So you have to, so that they can automatically debit your account. You don't have to keep it automatically debited, but you can't open the account without doing that. Getting a mortgage. Getting a mortgage is, thanks to FATCA, pretty difficult. But some people can qualify for a mortgage. Your mortgages here, by the way, are about, the interest rates are about half of what they are in the US. What's the going rate right now, you guys? Around 4%?
Around 3.75, depending on.
Okay, and in the States?
You're looking at 6.
Okay, so not quite half, but close. Okay, so it's more advantageous if you're going to buy property here to get a mortgage here if you can get it. But they don't want to lend to people who are over the age of 60 because a life insurance policy is attached to the mortgage. And the life insurance policy becomes really prohibitive as you get over 60 to 75. They want the loan to end by the time you're 75, so they don't like to lend to people over the age of 60. And then they don't like to lend to people who are self-employed because they see that as a big risk. Remember what I said about salaried? You can't lose your job. So if they lend to someone who's salaried with a CDI contract, the bank sees that as total non-risk, and it's really great. The loans in France are...
You know the biggest reason why there's that huge contrast between the French bank and an American bank? Here in France, the bank actually owns the loan. So their butt's on the line if you default on the loan. In America, the bank sells it off to Fannie Mae, who sells it to a pension fund. So basically, it's grandma's problem if you default on the loan. So
it makes it easier for them to give out the loans.
Basically, they're always passing it on, the risk, to somebody else, packaging it up in the States. So therefore, the banker doesn't care. They just want to crank out as many loans as possible. Here, the bank is stuck with that loan until you pay it off.
And they certainly don't want to be in the real estate business to have to sell a property, right? If you default on your loan. Go back.
So the going rule is the only people that can borrow money are the people that don't need the money to borrow.
Exactly.
Which is the origination of banking in the first place.
So let's see. There are some banks, though, that are willing to work with non-resident clients. And the loans are not based on your assets, they're based on your income. So you can say, oh, but I've got $5 million in the bank. They might not care. As long as if you don't have a salary, regular income, they're not going to care. You cannot obtain financing for much more than 25 years. That's pretty much the max, and you have to be pretty young to qualify for that. And the rates are based on the Euribor. Okay? Now, with the loans, there's usually a small origination fee that is charged by the bank. If you're working with a broker, then the broker might also have fees. And they will do kind of a decision in principle, not really a pre-approved mortgage, pre-approved loan, but a bank will issue a letter that says, we will give this person a loan if what they have told us is true, in effect, for a certain amount. But that's about as far as it gets. Okay, so income tax. You know that in the US you have citizenship-based taxation? One of 2 countries in the entire world that has this. France has residency-based taxation. This is a big contention for Americans living overseas, because as an American, you will always, forever, be obligated to turn in a tax return. You will be subject to taxes on your worldwide income forever as an American, and there's nothing you can do about it. Have you guys heard about accidental Americans and this big problem? An accidental American is someone who just by accident happened to get that citizenship. Maybe their parents were traveling in the US when gave birth in the US, and that person became an American citizen just by virtue of being born on the soil, but never actually lived there, never actually worked there, never earned any money there. And they still have to turn in a tax return. And I'm sure these guys can talk about that as well. Go back. I want some time. There is a very effective tax treaty between the US and France that works very, very well, so you don't pay tax on the same earnings twice. It's not foolproof. Sometimes it doesn't always work very well, but generally it's a really good tax treaty. I know these guys are going to talk about this too. French income tax is very high, but we get a lot of benefit for our taxation. Now you can go to the next slide. So for example, US Social Security, FICA, everybody know about FICA? Oh yeah, FICA? Well, the employee pays 7.65%, the employer pays 7.65%. If you're self-employed, you have to pay 15.3% for Social Security. What do you get for your Social Security? Well, you get retirement, you get Social Security when you retire.
There's a $200 death benefit on
It's
US
up
Social
to
Security
you
too.
to make sure that happens.
Believe it or not, okay, on my French earnings, I pay 45% in Social Security charges. But my health care is basically free. My child's education, basically free. I'm going to have a very nice pension when I want to take it. And it is what's interesting is that even though it's very high, I don't know anyone who complains about it, because we get so much benefit. Bernard's going, yeah. You get so much out of it that there's nothing to complain about. And we understand that we who are working and earning money are really supporting everyone, but that's okay because it's part of the socialist idea. Okay?
Sorry.
Now, what's really interesting, too, is that property taxes here are about 1/10 of what they are in the United States. Do you guys know about property tax? Do you know how much your parents pay for their property taxes? Do they complain? Yes. I find that property tax here is about 1/10 of what it is in the United States, believe it or not. California, for example, is 1.25% of the value of the property. Property in California is very expensive. Just by example, My apartment here in Paris, if it were in Los Angeles, would cost me more than $12,000 a year for taxes. And here it's under 1,000 euros. So it's really considerably less. But when you buy a property, the closing costs are higher. So the closing costs run between 7 to 7.5%. And that is, part of it is the state gets a little over 5%. The rest is taken by the notaire. The notaire is a property attorney who manages the transaction, much like a title company, for example. Property itself has a built-in negotiation fee, an agency fee. So when you see property priced, it includes the agency commission. The agency commission is not added to it. It runs about 5%. It can be a little less, it can be a little more, but that's the average. The agencies do not normally share their commissions. So in the US, when you have the MLS and an agent has access to all properties, they pretty much assume that they're going to sell a property that's listed by another agent and they're going to share their commission. And here, especially in Paris, they will not share commissions. So you're on your own. So this is just a wrap up on what we do a little bit differently. We represent a client. We are more for the buyer than for the seller. We list a few properties, but not many. I will not list a property that I wouldn't recommend a client buy. So we really represent the buyer, not the seller. We search for properties either to rent or to purchase. We provide all the resources. We do all the due diligence, which is enormous because there will be a stack of documentation this thick on a property that has to be gone through. It's all in French legalese. It's lots of fun to read, but we do that. And we manage the process from beginning to end, and so we think of ourselves as a kind of insurance policy. And these are just things we do like this. We run a coffee gathering in this room on the second Tuesday of every month. Brian and Jonathan both spoke here on Tuesday. We do one in Nice every other month, and we do all sorts of webinars and events, and I do personal consultations every single day. And so if you want to ask me questions now, let's see how we're doing on time. We've got time, right? We've got some time. Anybody have questions? Sure.
So in the United States, I think it's a lot of Americans are realizing that they can't afford to buy property and forced to rent property. I'm kind of curious to see if that's a similar situation in France, where property values are way above what people can actually afford to purchase, and if it's a renter's or a buyer's market.
Well, it's actually the opposite. The French cannot afford to buy with today's mortgage rates because the rates have gone up. Even though they're half of what they are in the States, they're still, for the French, expensive. But consequently, property prices have gone down because they can't be sold. So all over France, price of property is way down, with the exception of one city, Nice. Property in Nice is up. Now, some experts say that the reason Nice is up is because it's not as dependent on the French as it is on the foreign market because it's such an international market. I think there's more to it than that because I keep an apartment in Nice. I spend about half my year there. And I think it's because it's a very well-run city that is just blossoming thanks to an amazing mayor named Christian Estrosi. And during COVID, 64% of the Parisians that left went to that region. So it's just the hot spot. And I think it's more than just the foreign buyers.
Can I expand on that a little bit?
Sure.
I think this is a very political-driven thing in most developed countries, because developed countries are going to have a home ownership between 60% and 70%. I just pulled it up. France is at 65%, right in between. Germany's the anomaly, it's at 50%. The countries that have the highest home ownership are all developing countries. So going at the top of the list, Laos, Romania, Kazakhstan, Slovakia, and Hungary. Not exactly model countries that if a politician says, I want home ownership to be higher, we're wanting to model after those countries. So what's the reality of it is that people are more transient when they're renting than when they're owning. And that's where developed countries are more likely to have more transient individuals in those types of ways. So we have to be careful of how we listen to the political jargon.
Well, I can tell you from my own client base that there's a huge exodus out of the United States thanks to the political climate. I hear it every single day. And they are mostly at the moment wanting to rent because they're not sure of where they want to buy. So we have a lot more rental searches going than we have for purchases, with the exception of Nice. We have a lot of clients buying in Nice. But in Paris is kind of dead at the moment. Yeah, yeah.
Just a quick question. I'm kind of curious. For your clients in particular from the United States, what states in particular are you seeing people from that want to move to France?
That's a really good question. It used to be that 20% of all of our clients came out of California. That is not true anymore. First of all, we have a lot younger clients coming because you can work remotely now from almost anywhere. So I've got clients who are even in their early 30s that are saying, get me out of here. I can work from anywhere. I've had a lot of Midwestern clients, and they say, I'm blue, I'm living in a sea of red, help, okay? And that's happening a lot more and more. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen in November, but it's looking interesting. And so if it goes too far right, we're going to see a lot more people leaving the U.S.
Isn't that somewhat true in Europe, though, as well?
All over Europe.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm just saying it's going. Isn't there concern over sort of a right?
Oh, the right side?
Yeah.
Not.
I mean, in France, right, with Marianne Le Pen?
Not well. Yes, that is definitely true. Okay, it's definitely true that it is on the rise across Europe. But we're talking about my clients are Americans.
Sure.
Okay, and they are generally our side. I mean, most expatriates. You have to understand, most expatriates who have left the United States are pretty much politically on the left. That's 95%. It's just the way it is. Okay, it's a fact. And so it's going to be real interesting to see what happens. We're going to be real busy if it goes in the direction that I would not be happy with. Such is life. Yeah. Sure.
Do you find that most of your clients, now that you say Paris is kind of dead, are they moving more south, like more people want to live in the south of France, or is it still northern? Like, where do people typically want to rent or buy?
Good question. It is definitely different for Americans versus other nationalities like the British, for example, who are not like us at all. They speak English, but they are as foreign as the French. Americans tend to congregate in Paris, Nice and the Riviera, and in Provence. And then there's smatterings in other places, but that's where they've always been. The Riviera is just seeing a huge boost, and I personally think it's because I started talking about it. I write 3 newsletters a week. I have a fairly large base. And I bought my apartment in 2011 and started really writing about the benefits of living on the Riviera. And since then, it's just gone whoosh. And now our community there is enormous. I hosted a Thanksgiving dinner in a restaurant. We had almost 60 people. So it was very rewarding. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you. I know you said that you mainly just work in France or only work in France, but do you see like similar things going on in other European countries? You know, that different from the U.S.
Definitely.
Like what are you seeing?
Well, one of the other countries that's really seen a lot of activity is Portugal. And Portugal's done a huge promotional campaign to bring in foreigners and foreign investment, and property was very inexpensive in Portugal. It's no longer very inexpensive. It's continued to increase in value, which is another reason to invest there. But interestingly enough, I have a lot of clients, believe it or not, who are moving from Portugal. They went to Portugal first. And then they contact me and say, well, it's just not France. because France offers so much in the way of infrastructure, healthcare, all sorts of other advantages that Portugal just can't. And France is a very highly cultured environment that just offers a refinement to their life that the other European countries don't. And so they're actually moving out of these other places to France. Yeah.
You mean it's more interesting here as well for these people?
Yes. You know what they say, Bastia? It's just not France. I mean, the museums, the art, the culture, the theater, the opera, the whatever, yeah. It's not there. It's here. The food, the wine, the cuisine. Hold on. Yeah.
Yeah. To kind of bounce off of that, how do you think that, like, how do you balance, encouraging foreign investment, but also making sure that the local economy stays pretty stable? Because, like, we talked about the example of Portugal. I assume if there's a lot of foreign investments, Portugal becomes a very expensive city, and the local residents are probably a little bit angry that now their city that they've lived in for so long is not affordable.
Oh, they're pissed off completely,
Yeah.
and they blame us. We had this conversation at lunch, as a matter of fact.
Guy here for lunch. He is so mad at Americans. He's like, you buggers have made our prices too high. It is what it is.
Too. The Brits too, because I hear that in Bretagne and Normandy and Southwest where they go,
Right.
it's been 30 years already that the Brits put the prices up as well.
It's true. So I guess it depends on your point of view. If you own property, then you're happy the value's increased. If you don't, then you're like pissed off, right?
How does America feel about immigrants?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. But foreign investment in a country is money that they didn't have to generate themselves. So it benefits the country, maybe not the individual. Right. Yeah.
Beginning, you were talking about like the MLS. Can't remember exactly the term, but like the MLS in the United States. Why hasn't that really been developed in Europe that much? Like that.
Cultural. They're never going to share information. The French don't understand promotion, they understand protection. It's a completely different way of looking at life. If you take your camera and go to a storefront and you want to take a picture of what's on display, if you were the store owner in the United States, you'd think, oh man, that's cool. I'm going to be on some blog or on TikTok or God only knows what. The owner of that shop will run out and tell you not to do that. You are stealing their ideas. It's a very different way of looking at things. Yeah?
I'm curious to know, how has the pandemic impacted your clients, what they think? Have you seen like an increase of clients wanting to make the move even after?
Wait, but the beginning of your question I didn't hear.
Just curious to know, how has the pandemic affected?
How's the pandemic affected things?
Yeah.
It was an interesting situation because during the pandemic, the first few months when we were really confined, and we were really confined, we were only able to leave our homes for 1 hour a day and no further than 1 kilometer.
With a note.
Yes, you had to.
Paper.
Yeah, right.
Otherwise you have a fine from the police.
Exactly, and they did stop me a couple of times. We saw no movement whatsoever. Then, interestingly, what happened was our American clients started to say, okay, we are really getting anxious and we want to do something. Can we buy something sight unseen? We sold dozens of properties completely sight unseen by the buyer, just based on photos, videos, walkthroughs, things like that. It was really amazing. So for us, it was great. Can't complain whatsoever. Yeah.
One company that's kind of come under fire in the U.S. has been Airbnb, especially in places like California and Florida, with people buying Airbnbs, driving up property values. Especially, are you seeing anything? Like, I just want to know your thoughts on Airbnb in France.
How much time have you got? Gonna need a few days. Airbnb was a brilliant concept. It started with a crazy idea of putting a blow-up bed on the floor of Brian Gresky's apartment. And clearly there was a need for it. Otherwise it would not have exploded the way it did, right? And in essence, all it does is connect the landlord directly to the tenant so that there was no middleman. That's the concept of it. Here, like all over the world, there is this yin-yang push-pull between the permanent residents and the Airbnb apartments that have people going in and out. So the permanent residents hate them, even though I bet they're the ones that are still booking Airbnb apartments when they travel, is my guess. They're talking out of both sides of their mouths. The city of Paris and other cities across France have housing shortages, and they have blamed short-term rentals and the Airbnb-style apartments for their housing shortage, which is really not true. I mean, that is, it might be a very small part of the reason, but it's not the reason. But in spite of it, they used it because they knew that the politicians know that they'll have a big contingency of the permanent residents who don't want those Airbnb apartments, right? So the laws in Paris are very strict. They will allow a permanent resident, only your primary residence can be rented short term and for only up to 4 months. If it's a secondary residence, like my clients' properties are, then they literally cannot rent less than 1 month. And it has to be on what's called a mobility lease, which is 1 to 10 months to someone who's here on business or education only. So it becomes really cumbersome and really difficult. I had 2 rental apartments myself that were generating quite a nice income, and I ended up selling them off. And I had a rental business where I represented about 35 properties, and I shut it down. And my clients who own properties are now really scrambling to find some way of getting some revenue out of their properties that they're not using most of the year. So it's a bit of a disaster. The same thing has happened in Nice, but it's not quite as strict as in Paris. Yeah?
When it comes to someone considering leaving the U.S. and moving here, outside of real estate, what other concerns do they usually bring up to you when wanting to handle that transition?
Taxation! Jonathan's gonna talk about that. Yeah, taxation. I mean, it all starts with first the ability to live here legally, which means having a visa, right? Then there's just the physical aspect of the move and finding housing. And before that, they really should be talking to Jonathan about how to set up their taxations, because you can live here and pay a lot less tax than if you're living in the U.S.
But we still complain about the taxes.
Well, of course you complain about the taxes. You complain about everything. Exactly. The French are not happy if they're not complaining.
Me first.
Parisians above all.
I saw a hand back there. Yeah.
Yeah. How often do your clients get here and realize they maybe don't like it as much as they thought and they want to move back to America?
Never.
Really?
I've never. The only people who move back, no, I've had maybe one in all these years. The people who generally move back have been here many years and they have grandkids and they just want to go back and be with their grandkids. If you're here any length of time, you're never going back. I came for a year. That was 30 years ago. Yeah.
Do you see American students that come over and study for a semester or something and then want to come like immediately after they graduate and live here?
Almost every day. I hire them. Sure.
I guess a lot of your clients moving over here too because of better work-life balance, because it said it's not as work-focused here in just Europe as...
It's a benefit. Yeah, it's a benefit.
Would you say like a large portion of your clients?
No, most of them are retirees. Most of them have, or empty nesters. The kids are gone. They can work independently. They can work from their homes, and they see a new life. One of the things that happens here is that, in the U.S., with the exception of New York, you're living in your car. You're living in a bubble. You go from your house to your car to the supermarket, maybe the supermarket to the bank, blah, 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 and back home, and you're always in your little bubble. You see what we're doing right here? Cafe life, people, being out in the public, being in public transportation. This is a very different way of living. And once you have really experienced living without a car, I haven't had a car for 30 years. And being able to commune, and I take my laptop and I work in a cafe or whatever, I have complete freedom to go anywhere I want to go, whenever I want to go, without the burden of the car. It's a big benefit. Very, very big benefit.
Make me unhappy in the US, I think, if I don't have this way of living with your car, going to the drive, at the bank, you just don't go out of your car. I've seen that, and it was shocking.
Drive-through.
Yeah, drive-through for everything.
Yeah, McDonald's, drive-through.
Yeah. I don't think I would like that at the long term.
But you do, okay, but Bastien, they don't know anything different because that is the way life is.
But I love America. Don't get me wrong.
Right. No, but when you don't even know what it could be like to not own the car. I spend a lot of time talking with my clients about living not in rural areas, but living in urban areas where they can experience that, because you can't even imagine what that would be like. But I walk out my door and I've got a grocery store in the corner. You know, yeah, thank you. 3 of them. Yeah, okay.
And I think we don't spend as much time in our tiny apartments, especially in Paris area and suburbs.
No, that's right.
So we go out. Now it's more expensive for us. Everyone is complaining about the prices and the inflation, of course. But I think when I was younger and I lived here, we were spending more time outside and we were just going home for sleeping. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
When I moved to other countries with bigger space, I did more time in my place.
In
Paris is different.
It's true. It's true. Our spaces are small, but there's so much life out there that you just don't spend your time in your apartment.
You mentioned that it's like a very different type of life here, which obviously it is. Do you feel like that's part of the reason why the property taxes are so much lower here? Because people aren't spending time in their houses and they're going out and living their life, whereas like in the US, like we like being in our house.
No, I don't think the taxation has anything to do with that whatsoever, but I'm not a legislator who makes the tax rules. Inheritance taxes, for example, are insanely expensive. And the closing costs are expensive, and the income taxes are high. So they just get their tax money in different ways. And maybe you guys have more information about to answer that.
The European legislators are always trying to get France to change how they view property taxes, because naturally it's easier to collect taxes if you do it on a property than it is on earned income, because you can take earned income someplace else, say a remote small island or whatever else it might be. So in Belgium and France, the European Union is always saying, hey, change how you tax. But naturally, if you go about and you find 65% of people own their house, and you say we're going to raise your tax bill because you own a property because it means it's harder for you to evade taxes, 65% of the country are going to be pissed off at you. So it goes to what Juncker used to always say, they know exactly what they need to do in government, they just don't know how to get reelected once they do it.
I got a few more minutes. And you have a question back there.
Here's a stat that I thought was really interesting.
Oh.
Before 2020, when Airbnb, the law went on Airbnb, Paris was the #1 market. Now it seems that they're the #2 market, right behind London. But they still have more listings in France than any other country in Europe.
Yes, but the listings won't rent for less than 1 month. For less than 1 month. No, the listing's there, but it's I'm sorry. Okay, I have a question way back there.
So you mentioned that your sector has been kind of negatively impacted by FATCA. But before we go home and start lobbying for FATCA to be overturned,
please do.
I'm just curious, do you think that it's been successful in its original purpose of sort of diminishing tax evasion abroad and money laundering and increasing financial transparency in sectors outside?
That's a good question. I don't know how to answer it.
I'll tackle that one.
Okay.
Sorry, I won't shut up in your presentation.
That's okay. I need all the help I can get, Brian.
So simply put, you actually have a couple bills by Congressmen to actually repeal FATCA right now. Now, the problem is they're all completely useless because most of them don't understand how FATCA really works. FATCA is the equivalent of having a video camera in front of the store to record whether somebody's robbing the place, right? The rules that really have become problematic was, first of all, citizens-based taxation, right? Now, that that means if you come abroad, you still have to report everything back to the United States that goes on. Then you have the FBAR rules, which means if you have over $10,000 in foreign bank accounts accumulated across the board, you have to report them back. And PFIC rules, which basically means if you make any investment outside of the United States, it's probably going to fall into this. Now, if you don't repeal or change those in some sort of regard, which could include actually just increasing them by inflation, you're going to end up repealing FATCA and not being able to change anything for those that are not doing anything wrong because they still have to be enforced by those different rules. So the FATCA repeal, to me, doesn't help anything if you change those rules to make them so that they're not so burdensome. First of all, we don't get to hear Jonathan speak because he doesn't have a job. And second of all, essentially, he's done nothing but let the guilty get away with things, and we're just still stuck with all the reporting.
Okay, maybe one more?
Yeah, go for it.
It's just a super small question, but I'm just curious if a lot of your clients have bank accounts in the Cayman Islands or something like that.
I have absolutely no idea whether they have them or not. But I've certainly done lots of business with what's considered offshore banking. And I happen to know for a fact that those banks, they have to do a lot of due diligence to even take on an account. So they can't, the banks themselves can't risk having a problem with a particular bank account. So it's not as big a deal as people think.
Can I ask a question of the group to see what the response is? Do you guys know what the biggest offshore banking location is in the world? Not even close. It's a good guess. It's a typical guess. The United States of America. We all think of offshore banking as this illegal transaction, etc. But if you think of Latin America, Central America, if you're in a devaluing currency, where do you want your money? A stable currency, right? So go down to Miami, go into banking in Miami. You're only going to deal in Spanish, and you're only going to be dealing offshore. America's the biggest offshore banking market in the world. Makes Switzerland, Liechtenstein, all these, Monaco, they look tiny compared to the offshore banking market in America.
Switzerland we cannot anymore because they have to declare everything in French, right? Liechtenstein, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Monaco was the best. Where Charles de Gaulle brought the tanks all the way down to Monaco, and he said, "Would you like to be part of us, or would you like to declare your things to us?"
I want to end up with something. At the beginning of the week, all of you apparently said at the briefing after the scavenger hunt that you will not see yourself living here, and it was very expensive to buy or rent. I find it also expensive. So, and then it was just the beginning of the week. It was not very comfortable with Paris. It was new culture, and also I heard that it's very dirty for some of you in comparison.
It is dirtier.
Yeah, it is dirtier this year. I don't like it either. We're complaining a lot because of the mayor.
Yes, none of us like the mayor.
Yeah,
That's something else.
Socialists.
That's not the problem.
The last one was a socialist.
Yeah, Delanoë.
Delanoë, but he was better. Yeah, that's true. But,
it's not about her being a socialist. It's just about her making really stupid decisions.
That's right. So they thought.
That's something else.
I heard that, right?
Okay.
Some of you told me it's dirty here. It's true. But all of you thought it was really expensive and shocking how expensive it is, small, right? Let's say that at your class.
They did, yes.
Yeah.
A lot less expensive than the States. When I go back, it's like, oh my, shock!
Yeah, but Minnesota maybe
Sticker
it's
shock.
Less. It's less. It's the costs that are expensive, right? If I'm not.
No, inflation's everywhere.
Yeah.
What's it cost to eat lunch in the United States right now? With tax and tip.
Well, with tip, your entree is $20, $25 plus tip.
Right, by
And
the
it depends what you tip.
Uh-huh.
With tip, so 30.
You're spending less here, is my guess.
$12.
Okay. No, it's good. That is the perfect segue. Okay? Jonathan's up next. And then after Jonathan, we'll take a break before we get to Brian.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. Let me switch to Jonathan's. presentation. Okay.
Got it on blue. All right. Sorry, Bernard.
Sorry.
All right.
There we go.
All right.
Okay, now I had a glass of water. Hold on, Jonathan.
Hold on, I have a glass of water too.
That's my
You
little.
guys ask hard questions. Good. All right.
Come back to the heckling corner.
I wish I had the mic on you though. No, because they won't hear it in the recording.
Don't worry, I'm loud.
Oh.
Maybe.
That was actually
Oh, thank you.
as always.
Blue. All right.
Who went to Versailles today? Who went to Versailles?
Oh, I have dozens. Yeah. It just does not want to stay.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is, do you remember the grumpy old men in the Muppets? Adrian?
All right. Hold on.
Do you remember the grumpy old men in the Muppets? Adrian and I are gonna be that during Jonathan's entire production. Yeah, it stinks. I should turn this off before I do.
Ready?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is everybody ready? We're good? Look lively, look lively. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Hadida. Very good, thank you. Hadida Tax Advisors,
I'll take it from here.
you're up.
All right. I am going to start with something that's not on my slide, so I'm going to not talk. I'm going to just take this off. How many of you guys like having your grandparents live near you? None of y'all? Dad? You like it, Dad? Okay. Cool. I'm going to call you Dad because I love your shirt. It's the best. Like, honestly, I want that sweater. Like, I'm going to have to buy it on the internet now. So, basically, long story short, why should your grandparents who live in Minnesota move to France? And it is not Nice. Nice is nice. Hérault is better. Montpellier is better. Don't tell Adrian. No. She'll get mad. Don't tell Adrian. But Montpellier is so much flippin' better. So much prettier. But anywho, why should your grandparents get off of their keisters, stop cheering for the Badgers, because that dude told me that the Badgers are the best. That guy, he's a Badgers fan. He said Badgers rule. Anyways, why should we stop cheering for the Badgers? Oh, come on, dude. I know it's the Gophers. They're amazing. So, why should your grandparents move to France? Okay, and how will they pay less taxes in moving to France than by sitting in Minnesota? It's quite simple. France and the U.S. have the greatest tax treaty known to flippin' man. The American dude who wrote that for you guys, go find him, give him a hug, give him a kiss on the lips. God knows whatever you want to do. Give him a high five because he made life for Americans in France amazing. This is the place to be for American retirees. The treaty, and Brian may or may not have heard this before, is basically colloquially referred to as the bee's knees for American retirees. Okay.
For those of you Googling things, the bee's knees is a gin-based cocktail.
And
I hear it's delicious.
I'm impressed by how fast you got that one.
Yeah, but what year does that go back to? The 20s?
Doesn't really matter. It's the best.
1921. Wow, that's impressive.
Now, why are they going to pay less taxes here? Your grandparents, why are they going to pay less taxes here than back in Minnesota? Because Minnesota charges you 5.5% to 9.8% state taxes. That's flippin' high for such a flippin' cold place whose hockey team is not anywhere half as good as the Winnipeg Jets. Okay? So basically, why, sorry, I apologize, guys. I'm going to get booed off stage. I'm going to be gone, but I'm going to come back and tell you all how much John Casey meant to me back in my youth. Now, do y'all know who John Casey is? Dad? Come on, Dad. He's the North Stars goaltender. He was the North Stars goaltender. He was awesome. Anyways, back to real life. The U.S.-French tax treaty states that U.S. citizens living in France only pay U.S. tax on U.S. sourced investment income, interest, dividends, capital gains, pension income, and Social Security and rental income. Meaning that your grandparents who are living on U.S. Social Security, on IRA distributions, on interest, dividends, capital gains, they're not going to pay, they're only going to pay tax to the U.S. federal government, okay? They're not going to pay taxes to the state of Minnesota anymore, okay? Well, holy cripes, who's going to pay PJ Fleck's salary now? Okay, so basically,
They're from Minnesota. You have to say oofta.
okay, I have no idea what that is.
Is that age not well?
I still say it.
Okay.
But I'm very
I have no idea what that is. So basically, the U.S.-French tax treaty is the reason why, is to me, as a tax professional, the reason why Americans are moving here. It's not the culture, it's not the baguettes, it's not Nice, because again, it's taxes, people. It all comes back to taxes. Everybody cares about how much money they're going to pay in taxes.
That's true.
So at the end of the day, they pick up the phone and they call me. That's why Adrian likes me, because I get on the phone and I say, move to France, people. It's the best. Oh, it is. For American retirees, you're not an American retiree. Therefore, it's different. An American retiree, we had 50 American retirees in here the other day. Up until the point I told them, just don't die here, they loved me. The minute I told them don't die here, they hated me because they were like, shit, my heirs are gonna pay a lot of taxes. So, but anyways, the reason people move to France is the US-French tax treaty, and that is not on my slides, so I apologize for bringing this up. Let's talk about what we're gonna talk about today. Today we are going to talk about stuff that you do not hear in your accounting class, because I heard you're an accounting major. Yes, please. The guys at Lots of Tax right across the street from your faculty, and I love the name Lots of Tax Accounting, so if any of you guys want a job, go to Lots of Tax. It's literally across the street from the Carlson School of Management. Amazing name. Like, honestly, fantastic name. I'm going to talk about U.S. tax basics, okay? But I'm going to talk about U.S. tax basics for Americans living in France, okay, and outside of the U.S. So these are stuff that, again, you may or may not know. If you know it, cool. If you don't know it, cool. So we're going to talk about the U.S. basics, who's a taxpayer, who, what, when, where, why, how. We're then going to go into how we avoid double tax for Americans living here and working here. And then we're going to talk about a couple of filing requirements, notably the FBAR, notably the gift tax returns. And then I'm going to throw in a quick segue into why people shouldn't talk to their French bankers, which will perfectly send it to Brian and he'll take it from there, which is not on here, but we'll talk with him. Oh, there's a break into, sorry. It'll be a good segue, and then you'll think about why people shouldn't talk to their French bankers and all that fun stuff. But we'll get there in a second. So let's turn to slides, Adrian. So my name is Jonathan Hadida. I am the founder and principal of Hadida Tax Advisors. We are a U.S. and French tax firm based out of Geneva, Switzerland. We primarily focus on U.S. individuals living in and around France. My background is I was a tax manager at Deloitte. I then moved and was a senior tax manager at a firm called Provision Wealth in Phoenix, Arizona, where I worked for 5 years. The calling card for why I went to this firm, and this is the God's honest truth, and I will never tell this to anybody who comes to our other presentations, because as Adrian said, they are all on the left, but I'll tell it to you all because it was a funny story. The firm was run by a gentleman. His main client is Robert Kiyosaki. Everyone here know who Robert Kiyosaki is? Okay, so Robert Kiyosaki was our main client. And the headhunter who sold me on the firm said, come work at Provision, it's cool. They've got Robert Kiyosaki, and they also work with Donald Trump. Now, back in 2014, that was flippin' cool. Now, I don't tell people in Europe this that much. I'm not silly. I'm crazy, but I'm not that silly. So, I've been doing this now about 18 years. I used to have less gray hair. I used to have more hair. I have less now. It's all based on FATCA and guilty and all those fun stuff. So we'll blame all that for all that.
Talk about the guilty and the repatriation.
I am not going to be talking about that. That's above our scope for today. Today we're going into the introductory stuff. We want to keep it soft. We want people to still like us. So. Any questions about me, about anything like that, about the background? Yeah.
This wasn't really about your background, actually.
Yeah.
But I can say it later, I
Why? It's very simple. We saved them in the World War. We being yes, Canada saved you all. Well, Canada saved everybody. Everyone knows that. The Americans, because of the it's because of the war. It's because of the war, and it's not America. It's why did France give America such a sweetheart deal? Because let's be honest with y'all, if you watch American TV, Americans aren't very nice to France on American TV. But flippin' hell was France nice to y'all on the treaty. Okay, it's honestly amazing. Tell your grandparents. If y'all don't like them, tell them. Adrian will find them a place. But again, remember, hero. Why not? So, all right, let's turn to slides. Let's get started. U.S. tax basics. Who, what, when, where, and how. Who is required to file a U.S. tax return? All y'all. All American citizens, because y'all are American citizens, every one of y'all. You have to file a tax return, okay? And like Adrian said, citizenship-based taxation, such a magnificent tool. Why is it a magnificent tool? It keeps me fed, keeps my kids clothed, no matter where I live. So, who has to file a U.S. tax return irrespective of where they live? Well, who has to file a U.S. tax return in general? U.S. citizens, U.S. green card holders, and U.S. residents, okay? Who has to file a U.S. tax return irrespective of where they live? Citizens and green card holders. Okay, so if you're a U.S. citizen, you file a U.S. tax return irrespective of where you live. Again, keeps my kids fed.
Jonathan, is your microphone turned on? I just want to make sure.
I don't know.
No, the button.
You tell me.
Good, you're good.
All right, I am good. I try my best. All right, any questions on this? Okay. All right, what do they pay tax on? They pay tax on everything. So on your worldwide income. So I'd say at least once a month, I get a phone call from somebody. It's Bob Smith. Hey, this is Bob down in Hero because Hero is the best. I'm going to continually beat this joke to death because it's fun for me. So I'm Bob Smith. I'm down in Hero. I earn 90,000 euro. I haven't filed the U.S. tax return for the last number of years because somebody told me that I earn less than some exclusion that they told me about. I don't have to file a tax return, right? And of course my answer to Bob is, no, my friend, you do. And then Bob cries and we go off on a nice tangent, okay? But basically U.S. individuals have to file taxes irrespective of where the income is earned. They have to file it. So you earn income in France, you earn income in Switzerland, you earn income in Timbuktu. You're filing a U.S. tax return, okay? So you're required, and again, you may say to yourself, well, Lord, they have to pay taxes twice. We'll get to that in a second. But basically, you have to file the same income you earn in France. You have to report it on your French tax return, on your U.S. tax return. Okay? When do you file taxes? Now, here's the fun thing to tell Americans when they move abroad. April 15th is not tax day for Americans who live abroad. It's actually June 17th, or it's June 15th, but this year it's June 17th. Now, why is that? Is Americans who live abroad benefit from an automatic 2-month extension on their taxes just by being abroad. Just by living abroad on April 15th, you get an automatic 2-month extension, okay? You do have to make a payment of your taxes due by April 15th. So April 15th, we actually have to make a calculation for them, but we can file their taxes by June 15th and not be late. From there, we can file an extension until October 15th. We also have an additional 2-month extension until December 15th for Americans. Now, why do we have that? Is because it takes time for Americans living abroad to get their documents. So basically, for the Americans living abroad, our tax season, my tax season, only stopped about 3 weeks ago, okay? So while tax Twitter in America was partying in the month of November, I was sitting in my office working 70, 80 hours because I had to get all my tax returns done. Because this is my tax season, really, October into December. The timing is different. So basically, Americans who live abroad generally have until December 15th to file their tax returns, okay? It's important to understand this if you ever come abroad and if you ever work with an American abroad because they have additional time to do their taxes, okay? So that's when. Let's flip it from here, Adrian. Sure. Where? So, the majority of tax returns are filed electronically. That goes without saying. It's easier. if any of y'all have seen the articles of what the IRS offices in Ogden look like, it looks like a mess. It's basically reams of paper upon reams of paper upon reams of paper. It's not pretty. So you want to file electronically. Alternatively, you can file by paper. That is why for my clients, I make it imperative that they understand that if we don't file by mid-November, we're going to have to paper file, and they're going to take a long time to process their returns. So really, I try as best as I can to get returns done by mid-November because it's electronically, it's easier, and I don't have to deal with, my clients calling me and saying, how do I have to send this by DHL? Can I use, the French Post and all that? It's a lot of schlep. So basically, where do we file? We file it electronically, or we paper file it with Austin, Texas. And I'm sure you all remember that there was a plane that flew into the IRS building down in Austin. It was the IRS building that houses the international team on 3651 South Interregional Highway in Austin. So anywho, long story short, either you e-file it, or if you're after November, you paper file it and you mail it to Austin. Okay? All right, Danielle, Adrian, sorry. All right. This is pretty self-explanatory for Americans. I put this here because it's not the same for French. How is tax calculated? How many of y'all file tax returns right now? All right, most of y'all. Okay, cool. So how is tax assessed? It's a system of self-assessment. So on your US 1040, it's easy as pie. You put in your numbers, its calculation comes out, it gives you your tax number. It tells you how much you've withheld. It tells you if you owe or if you're getting a refund. Pretty flippin' cool. You send it to the IRS, it's a self-assessment system. The reason I have this slide, in France it's not. In France, you put together the numbers, you send them the form, and 4 months later they'll give you a tax bill. Okay? So it's a little different. So basically for French people, this is weird what Americans do. They're like, wait, you don't get a bill, you don't get a letter from the IRS saying, hey, you actually owe $100 more. You don't, because in America, if you do it right or on the self-assessment system, right, they're going to move on. So taxes on a progressive rate, 10 to 37% in the U.S., different tax tables depending on filing status, capital gains, qualified dividends get a 15 or 23.8% tax bracket, and you get various taxes, deductions, and credits. Okay, I'm giving a short shrift because this is stuff that, if you guys want, I can go into this in more greater detail, but this is just the general stuff that you guys will see on your tax returns. Any questions on any of this fun stuff? Okay, cool. I'm going to try and get Dad excited because Dad looks like he's not excited just yet.
Sorry,
I know. It's all good. You've got the best sweater though. It's just too good. So, tax must be, should you pay taxes to the IRS? Taxes to the IRS need to be paid ratably throughout the year. And why is that important for individuals living abroad? It's important because they don't have withholding. They don't have U.S. withholding. So they have to make the quarterly estimated tax payments. Okay, so quarter one, April 15th. America. Today's an American tax discussion. If you want, I can talk about French at the end if y'all want a little bit. But basically, I'm talking American system because I want to hit on, really my goal for y'all is to understand that American taxes for Americans sitting in Minnesota are different than in France. Okay, that's basically it, the main criteria. So basically, again, they don't pay withholding, so they have to do quarterly estimates in the US. All right, Adrian? Now, this is the big stuff for Americans living abroad. How to avoid double tax. Okay, so how do we avoid double tax? Now again, the main thing to understand, you earn 100,000 euro. Okay, Adrian said it's 1.10, so let's use 1.10. 100,000 euros, $110,000. That $110,000 needs to be reported to France and needs to be reported to America. Okay, so theoretically, you're going to pay tax in both countries. That's why the U.S. has a system in place to avoid double tax. And that system is the foreign tax credit system and something called the foreign earned income and housing exclusion. Okay? So, Adrian, let's turn it. So, that's what it is, the two mechanisms. So, foreign tax credits. What are foreign tax credits? They are credits for taxes paid or accrued to a foreign country. Okay, so it's taxes either paid to France or accrued in France. Now, accrued means, let's say you have no withholding and you earn $100,000, you calculate your tax, France will give you a tax bill saying you owe $50,000 or whatever number it is. Well, that's your accrued French tax. Okay, so the French taxes are your taxes that you either pay to France or you accrue in France. Now, oh no, sorry. Yes, please. Now, the foreign tax credit cannot be a windfall for Americans because Uncle Sam does not want to pay you back money just because you're paying more taxes to France. Hypothetically, but in reality, it's almost always the case. So what happens is your US tax return, we calculate how much tax there is. Let's say it's $20,000 of tax. If you have $20,000 of foreign tax credits, we offset it 1 for 1. You have no taxes in America, and we move on for our day. Okay, so that's the key thing. The foreign tax credit cannot exceed the US tax on your foreign income. Okay, so that's important because, again, Uncle Sam does not want to give you money back because you live in France. Be cool, because then every single one of my clients would get money back from the American government. It's just not going to happen. All right, what do we got next? What are foreign taxes? Again, foreign taxes are generally income taxes, because on the income tax return, you generally have income taxes. Now, in France, there's a funny one. There's something called CSG-CRDS. CSG-CRDS is a 9.7% surcharge on your salary in France. Okay? In France, it's basically a social charge. It's contribution sociale générale. So it's an additional charge for social taxes. There were some enterprising US tax firms in Paris who got together and put together a court case, including the one that I was a tax director at the time, put together a case, went up against the IRS, and guess what? We won. And now, CSG-CRDS, instead of being treated as a social charge, is treated as a deemed income tax. So what's that mean? That means that of the 20-some-odd% social charges that an employee in France pays, 9.7 of them are now creditable as US income taxes. Okay? So what does that mean? That means a US person who moves to France and pays taxes in France generally won't pay tax in America. Okay? Generally won't. There's certain reasons where they would, but generally will not pay tax to America because tax in France is higher, as Adrian said, 0 to 45%. You got this 9.7% surcharge on top of it. Holy shnikes, that's more than your 37%. Okay? Taxes that are not creditable as foreign income taxes are social taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, capital taxes, and wealth taxes. Okay? But basically, again, just with your income tax in France and just with your CSG-CRDS, you're good to go. Okay? So, I covered this already. So basically, you may claim a foreign tax credit if you've paid it, so the taxes that you paid during the year, or accrued, which is basically the tax liability for the year, even if you paid less. Okay? Any questions on any of this? Cool. All right, let's flip. The foreign earned income exclusion and foreign housing exclusion. This is the way that the US helps you avoid taxes in most countries, is basically they allow you to write off the top a certain amount of your salary. Okay? So if you earn up to $120,000 in 2023, you can exclude that straight off the top of your US tax return if you meet one of 2 times-based tests and you earn the income. And this is an important one because people always come to me and go, hey, I have a lot of foreign dividends. I don't care. You're still going to pay tax on it. But income, you earn your income, you get this foreign earned income exclusion. So up to $120,000 in 23, $126,000 in 24, you could straight off the top take it off your taxes. So basically, Bob Smith is working at the boulangerie down the street. He's making not $120,000, not in France.
Maybe 20.
Maybe 20, yeah. More like 15 probably. But Bob Smith's working at the boulangerie. Just to let you all know, salaries in France are not high. So, you know, most of our clients who work here are not earning over 120,000. So they earn their salary, and basically you get this exclusion right off the top of 120,000 and wind up paying no tax. Okay? So let's flip the slides, Adrian. In order to benefit from the foreign earned income exclusion, now apologies if I'm going too deep, stop me if I am, but basically, in order to meet the foreign earned income exclusion, you have to meet one of two residency-based tests, one being the bona fide residence test, one being the physical presence test. And the physical presence test is basically a test whereby you have to show to the US government that you're physically present outside the US for 330 days in a 365-day period. Okay, so if you can show that you're outside the US for 330 days in a 365-day period, you've met the physical presence test. The alternative is the bona fide residence test. So for example, Dad over there decides he does not want to go back to Minnesota because he loves the Paris life. He moves here today, okay? But he has to go back and forth to the US and does not meet the physical presence test. He wants to meet the bona fide residence test. The bona fide residence test says you have to be outside the US for a full calendar year. So basically the first full calendar year that he'll be outside the US is next year's calendar year because he moved today, January 11th. Well, the first full calendar year is January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2025. So guess what? His 2024 tax return is going to be only filed in 2026. And the US gives you an extension for that. But basically, one of these two tests are met, you're good to go. You can get a foreign earned income exclusion. Adrian.
Yeah, but how does that with a 183-day tax rule?
The 183-day tax rule is a residency-based question. Is a residence question. So, the amount that you can exclude for the foreign earned income exclusion is, again, up to the lesser of your foreign earned income, or 120,000 in 23, 126 in 24, and it's based on your physical presence workdays. Okay, that's fine, Adrian. Okay. Additional to that, the US lets you also exclude a part of your rent. So a part of your rent and foreign housing costs can also be excluded off the top. So, and it's the limit is anything over 17,000 and over, well, 17,000 up to 33,000 can be excluded. And there are higher limits depending on what city you live in. So for example, in Paris, you can get up to 71,000. So if you spend rent in Paris up to 71,000, you can theoretically take about 50 some odd thousand as excludable on your US taxes. So if you live in Paris and pay $71,000, you can theoretically exclude right off the top your first $170,000 of of foreign sourced income. Sorry? Oh yes, you must rent but not own.
Okay, that does not fly with me.
It is what it is. It is what it is, because this, theoretically, the US government is doing this housing exclusion for people who are transient and are not going to stay abroad forever. They don't want people who settle roots. They want Americans to come back to America. And as Adrian said, no one goes back. Once you're here, you're stuck. It's like Lost. Okay?
But Adrian, don't worry, you've got so much taxes here in France that nobody's using that or having to use that when the Americans do it, right?
Okay. Adrian talked about something funny, and I'll add to that. No. I'm adding on what Brian added. France has a funny system. France has a funny system that if you have a contrat de durée indéterminée and you fired a person, you get a rupture conventionnelle. Basically, it's a thank you very much. It's not a severance check, it's a thank you very much, and you have to go through a contract. And it's based on a percentage of income, and it's actually even more than 2 years of salary in some cases. It depends on how long you worked with the company. So I'll give you the example of Bob Smith. Bob Smith worked at a company for 26 years. Bob Smith was transferred from America 3 years ago to France. He got fired. Okay? He got fired. Bob Smith was pissed. Bob Smith was crying up until the HR lady came up to Bob Smith and said, hey, Bob, now that you work in France, we have to honor all the years of your employment, 26 years of employment, and we're going to give you a severance check of 600,000 euro, 200,000 of which is tax-free. The other 400,000 is taxable. All because he transferred from the US. So basically, if you're about to get fired, move from the US, transfer to France, and then get fired.
And just don't die here.
Just don't die here, never die here. But basically, so France has something called a rupture conventionnelle and the severance payouts. Severance payouts are not taxable in France up to a certain portion. So Brian's comment of none of our clients will pay tax, they may pay tax on the severance payout. Okay, so that's why, again, firms like ours exist, because we keep track of these things. And I actually do ask my clients, do you have any thought, are you looking to get laid off in the coming years? Or are you up to getting retired? If retirement's coming, we have to do proper planning for all this stuff. Yes, sir?
Is there typically any like stipulations for like the reason that you got fired?
You can't get fired for cause. You can't get fired for cause. Like, you can't just go in and say bad things. But if you get fired just because of an economic layoff or just, or you retire, to be honest with you, my old boss used to say that his employees owned his firm, that he could not fire anybody because if he fired anybody, they would take all his money. He had 7 full-time employees, and I one day, like, I asked him, like, how much is it? And he basically said, for my 7 employees, he ran a number. He's like, it's going to be about 500,000 if I fired everybody. Again, something in that ballpark. That's a shed load of money just to fire people. So again, that's why French like employment contracts, and that's why there's a difference in mentalities. France has much more security, and now I'm going to Adrian's spiel, but basically French people have much more security, and that's why they work. Being self-employed in France is not seen like in America. People like me are weird. Okay, I own my own flipping firm. What the flip am I doing? I should be working for somebody because somebody will give me security. In America, it's not the case. Okay, it's a very different mentality. Thank flipping goodness I went to work in Arizona and I learned this. But anywho, couple of other things. Oh yeah, sorry.
I was just wondering, do you see that show up on accounting statements for companies here? Like, are there, in addition to provisions for taxes and doubtful accounts, are there provisions for maybe like layoff payments?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't do corporate taxes for French corporations. I only do French individual tax returns. Again, I just do that. Sorry, I don't. It's a good question. I would bet $1 there are, but I don't know. So I can't tell you, but I can find the answer. If you really want to know, give me your email and I'll get you the answer in about a day, like not even an hour or two. But I just don't know the answer right now. I'm sorry. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Other things to keep in mind as Americans moving abroad, because again, you have a question? No, cool. So as Americans who now, other things for y'all now as Americans who've come to Paris and love Paris because Paris is amazing, Paris is great. Foreign bank account reportings. So the foreign bank account report, FinCEN 114, is a separate filing with the Department of Treasury. Okay, and this separate filing with the Department of Treasury is required because Uncle Sam wants to know what bank accounts you have outside of the US. Okay, and it's been in place since 1960, Brian? 1972? Was it Nixon who put this in place? It was Nixon who put it in place. Now, just to be clear, before y'all go off and blame Obama, Brian's going to tell y'all how it was all Republicans who put all the bad rules in place. So if anyone has anything to blame Brian.
But Nixon was the only Republican Minnesota's voted in since 1932.
Ah, there you go.
I don't know. They might be on the fence. Definitely a blue state.
Fair enough. So,
sorry.
FBARs, foreign bank account reports. You are required to file a foreign bank account report if you have over $10,000 cumulatively in foreign bank accounts, okay, at any moment of time. So for a lot of Adrian's clients, they send over $100,000, they put it in a bank account, it sits in the bank account for a day, they buy a house. They have an FBAR filing requirement because they're over $10,000 at any point in the year. And again, it's cumulative, So if you all say, well, again, you're American, so good luck getting a bank account. But if you're lucky enough to get multiple bank accounts here, you'll have to, you'll have to do the cumulative total. Okay. Now, just an aside, because I want to add to what Adrian said about banking. You're American citizens. It goes both ways. You're not wanted on the French banks, but the American banks don't want you either. You're really up, and just to let you all know, I should have used this at the end because this is a perfect segue for why Brian has his firm. Because US individuals are having a hard time opening investment accounts or bank accounts here, and also their US banks are telling them to take a hike because they don't want people with a foreign address. It is a real quagmire. Banking is a real confusing, weird thing where Americans are taking it from both ends and are getting hit from both ends. So, the FBAR, you have to file it every year if you're over $10,000 in the year. Okay? On top of this, and this came from FATCA, they have something now called the Statement of Specified Foreign Assets, whereby, now the FBAR is a separate filing with the Department of Treasury. This is a part of your 1040, part of your individual tax return. So if you're a US person living abroad or in the US, and apologies, the thresholds are only for the people living abroad because I usually only talk to people living abroad. But basically, if you're a US person and you have foreign bank accounts outside of the US, you may have to have a second bank account reporting on your US tax return, okay? So for US individuals living in the US, I believe it's over 50,000 and 150,000 if you're single, and 100 and 150 if you're married. But basically, if you have over 50,000 bucks, you may have to file this Form 8938, okay? For our clients who live here, it's generally $200,000 on the last day, $300,000 at any time, or joint filers $400 and $600. But basically, what I'm trying to get at is the US government really wants that information, okay? And you have to provide it. And your clients will have to provide it. Your clients have no choice. You cannot just open bank accounts in the Caymans and just hide it there, or else the US government is going to come and knock on your door, and there are stiff penalties. For the FBAR, the penalties used to be $10,000 per account. It is now $10,000 per annum. But basically $10,000 per annum for not filing, it adds up over time because the IRS will come and knock on your door for this stuff. Okay?
Isn't there a case at the Supreme Court?
No, that's on guilty. That's on the.
But there's a separate one.
That one passed, and that the Supreme Court. It went. Yeah, yeah, 10,000. Yeah, unless the IRS or Congress. Unless Congress changes it. But good luck getting that happening. So.
Can we just get a budget?
Maybe. I apologize. We're not going into politics. I made the mistake yesterday of saying that France is like Florida without the swamp. Before I realized that the swamp was a political term, I was really meaning just the flippin' swamps. So.
We didn't get away with that one.
What?
We had fun with it.
Oh yeah, I didn't get away. I really was not trying to go into it too much. Only at Democrats abroad do I do that kind of stuff. But not yesterday wasn't my that day wasn't my plan. Gifts, okay? U.S. individuals who receive gifts do not have a filing requirement. So if your grandmother gives you a gift, you don't have to file a U.S. gift tax return. However, grandma may, and grandma may have to file a gift tax return if she gives you over $18,000 per person per year for 2024. It was $17,000 before, but now it's $18,000. So basically, if your parents want to give you any money, they can gift you $36,000 a year without having to file a gift tax return. U.S. taxpayers have a lifetime gift and estate tax exclusion of $13.6 million. Basically meaning a couple has over $27 million before they have to pay estate taxes. Just to give you all an idea. And I apologize, I should have probably thrown more French stuff in here, but I'm going to throw a French thing in here just to freak the living heck out of y'all as much as I freaked the living heck out of a bunch of people on Tuesday. In France, you die, you pay estate taxes pretty much from zero. Your kids can get about $100,000 exempt. Everything else is taxed at up to 45% to your kids. But if you want to give it to dad because he's got the coolest sweater I've seen, it's 60% if you give him over 1,596 euros. So if someone gives him over 1,596 euros, they are subject to gift tax. It's insane, at 60%. So this is why we colloquially say, don't die in France, and then Adrian comes back and says, but you have to live, and life in France is so much better, right? Did I get it right? Life in France is so much better. Again, Hero, my...
You're dead and you won't know.
You're dead and you won't know, but your kids will, and they'll remember you. They'll remember it forever, because you have to pay up the wazoo. And this is irrespective. So again, I know I said send your grandparents to France, but don't send your grandparents to France if they're not well. Because basically, your grandparents are going to wind up paying, you're going to wind up paying 45 or more % taxes on their estate. Okay? This last one is a segue at Brian. This is a segue for Brian and why Brian has a business is PFIX. And this is one where, again, I jokingly say it, but I will be completely honest with you. The most dangerous person for a US individual in France is a French banker. French bankers are dangerous. Not because they carry guns like American bankers may, not because they do anything bad, not because they know how to do some cryptic things with you. They will sell you French mutual funds. They will sell you French ETFs. Those things are flippin' poison. So you got to stay away from your French bankers. Or if you all become a French banker, listen to me here and understand why you have to tell your American clients not to invest in French investment products. There is something called the Passive Foreign Investment Company, and Brian will go off and tell you a lot more in the technical side about how in 1986 Ronald Reagan put this in place to stem the flow of currencies from going abroad and people hiding their investments abroad. I'll tell you how it works. How it works is the following. If you are invested in a foreign mutual fund, the US government will require you to annually file a Form 8621 whereby you report to them that you have this foreign mutual fund. There are various ways to potentially alleviate the tax on this, but I'll give you the worst way, the worst of the situation. It's basically you hold this foreign mutual fund, okay? You buy it for $100 today. 20 years from now, you sell it for $200, okay? So that's a $100 gain. You have a $100 gain. You've held it for 20 years. Here's how the US government taxes you at the most punitive rate. Actually, let's go 20 years back. You bought it 20 years ago, okay? And you've held it for 20 years. That $100 gets ratably allocated over the 20 years. So $5 gets ratably allocated to each year. That $5 then gets taxed at the top tax rate of the year for the last 20 years. So up to 39.6%, 37, 35 sprinkled in, but still top tax rate. So you may be at the 0% tax rate, but you'll get taxed at the top tax rate. Here's the kicker, friends. You also have to pay interest on those portions from the date you bought it. So you may have to pay interest for 20 years. So on that $100 gain, you may wind up paying to Uncle Sam $50, $60. I had a woman last year, she paid 53% tax. She was freaking out on me on the phone. And my answer was, did you not listen to me when I said do not go to the French banker? Because honestly, these things are toxic and are poison. And that, again, is why firms like Brian's exist, because they help US individuals invest in US securities. Now, let me tell you why. If you guys move to France, it is imperative to invest in US securities. The US tax treaty again. Now, why do I say the US tax treaty? If you invest in French stocks, so you come here, you open an account with BNP Paribas, you've heard me say no ETFs, no mutual funds. I didn't say don't invest in Total, don't invest in BNP Paribas, don't invest in the French companies. Go off and invest in the French companies if you want. But if you do, France will tax you at 30% on any capital gain. Under the tax treaty, the French, if you have your investments in the US, the France will not tax you on this investment. Okay, they'll only be taxed in America. And the American tax rate for capital gains, qualified dividends is 15%. So basically, long-term capital gains, 15% is less than 30%. So it is a tax planning tool to invest in America. America first. And the French want you to invest in America first. Man, I'm going too political. But basically, that's why, again, these things are terribly, terribly dangerous, and why in my job, I jump up and down whenever someone says, I'm going to stay with my French banker and invest with my French banker. I nearly have a heart attack. I basically then, I tell them, talk to Brian Dunhill. They talk to Brian. They don't want to invest with Brian for God knows what reason. It's tricky. It's not just Brian, but folks like Brian. It's really, really heavy. So these PFIC rules are terribly, terribly nauseous, toxic. Okay? Any questions from y'all? Okay. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned people don't.
Oh, sorry. Yes. No, go ahead. You go.
You mentioned people shouldn't die here.
Yes.
You kind of help integrate people into this area, but with the horrible estate tax, etc. Like, is it a clear value proposition, and do you help people integrate back into countries with better tax estate, or is it kind of just people come here, you work with them, they're on their own, and then they die, and sorry?
No, at the end of the day, it's not my choice. I'm not telling them to move here. I'm not packing their bags and moving them out of America. I'll be honest with you. You guys are voting in November. You guys are deciding if people are going to move out of America. To be completely honest with y'all.
Yes, but explain how to set up the structure of a purchase.
In what sense?
To avoid the inheritance tax.
So, okay, in France, if you buy a piece of property, okay. So let's say you buy a piece of property in France. You could set it up and minimize, not avoid, minimize your inheritance tax with something called a démembrement. France has a funny legal system, okay? So let's say I own this room, okay? I own it, this is my room, but I want to give it to you when I die. I can go to the notaire today and say, Mr. or Mrs. Notaire, I want to give it to that dude, okay? And she'll say, okay, cool. But I want to give it to him when I die. So we'll do something called a usufruit, a right of use. So I will keep the right of use of this room for the rest of my life, and you'll get a droit, you'll own it. But basically, you'll only own it when I die. Okay? And when I give it to you, I will get a reduction in my value of my property. I'm in my 40s, I'm going to get a 60% reduction. I know generally for higher age, but I get about a 50 or 60% reduction. Sorry, I haven't looked, don't have many people at my age doing it. But anyways, I get a reduction of my estate taxes. I pay estate taxes now on the value of the room minus the 50 or 60%, and I pay my estate taxes now. So that's how we would do it. That's one way we would do it. Is we would tell you, go off and buy it and reduce the value. Other way, you're moving to America, you're moving here, you've got, you're a retiree, okay? You've got millions, okay? My first thing before you move, always before you move, I would say to you, hey dude, do you want to give money to your kids? Maybe do it before you move to France. Because again, when you move to France, and this is, sorry, okay, I'm going to back up and talk a little bit more about French taxes. When you gift in France, you have a gift tax. The limits are very, very low. $100,000 to your children every 15 years. To your postman, less than $2,000 every 15 years. So basically, if I wanted to gift to you, I can gift you less than $2,000 tax-free. Anything over that, I'm paying 60% tax. So, and if you were my kid, I can gift you $100,000, and the value of this room is millions. So it would be much worse, okay? So again, it depends on your situation. So you do something called a démembrement is a trick. So the other option is, before the person comes, you tell them, give the kid money before they come. Because in the US, you have that $13.6 million exemption. Well, use it. Give the money to your kids before you move to France, because when you get to France, you're not going to be able to give money anymore. You're only going to be able to give money before you come to France.
You can also put the title of the property in your children's names.
Again, before you come to France.
Well, no, when you buy the property.
Yeah.
You structure it such that they basically own it, or own most of it, so that when they inherit, that reduces their inheritance taxes. But like Jonathan was saying, I just recently transferred the title of my Paris apartment to my daughter. So it cost me a certain amount of transfer taxes to do that, but not near what it would cost her to inherit the property.
Yeah. So France, so the thing to understand is that France has high tax on employment, France has high tax on gifting, and France has high tax on estates when you die. Okay, those are the 3 highest taxes in France. They have low property taxes, but they have crazy high taxes on income, on earned income, on death, and on gifts, and social security. Sorry, that goes with employment. Okay, but base sales tax. Come on, 20%.
3% above Timbuktu. Timbuktu is only 18%. Danielle and I looked it up.
Really?
Yeah, when you talked about Timbuktu.
There you go. Fair enough. Basically, long story short, France is a high tax country. If you move to France, you have to be aware of it. And I'm actually going to back up a second and talk about some more French tax. If Dad, you're not bored yet? Cool. All right. Dad wants to move to France. Okay? He wants to move to France. He's decided after his trip he wants to move to France. I'm going to tell Dad to go back to America. Okay? I'm going to tell Dad to go back to America and get a job in America. Get a job from America. Go sit yourself in Blythe Hall, is it? Or Blight Hall? Blagan Hall. Dang it. I was trying to be cool and I messed it up. I least I got lots of tax. That one was cool. So he's sitting in he's going back to Blagan Hall. He's going to sit in Blagan Hall. Is that the name of the hall, is it? Sweet. Brian topped that one. Okay. Hey, I could have also said the West Bank Union building, but that one was going to get too political. Anyways, so he's sitting in Blagan Hall. I'm going to send him back to Blagan Hall, sit in Blagan Hall, apply from Blagan Hall, get your job from Blagan Hall, and then come to France. Why am I going to tell him to do this? I'm going to tell him to do this because France has a pretty flippin' neat system called the impatriation regime. The impatriation regime is such that allows you to exclude straight off the top 30% of your salary from taxation if you come from abroad. If you're brought over from abroad, your salary is over the French average, which is not very hard, and you haven't filed the French tax return in the last 5 years. So if you've done that, you could save yourself up to 30% of tax, okay, on the first 8 years of earnings. And let's be honest with you, 8 years is a long flipping time. I could tell y'all in 8 years, the last 8 years, I lived in Switzerland, I lived in America, and if you go back a little further even, I lived in Belgium. So, people move around. We're not, things change. So, the main thing to note is if you want a job, if you guys are sold on Paris, go to flippin' Blagan Hall, apply there, and then come get the job here because you want this impatriation regime. Okay? Sir, with the hat.
So, I guess just a question. If I was an American citizen, set up like a company in the U.S., was like owning and running this company for a while, and then moved to France but continued to operate the business in the U.S., am I going to be paying French taxes on my income that's based in the United States, or what would that look like?
Perfect question.
There's a recording right now, Jonathan. Be careful.
That is a really great question. And the answer is you'd probably wind up paying taxes in France. And your whole company would probably wind up paying taxes in France because there's something called permanent establishment risk. So we'd have to look at where's the permanent establishment of your company. Where is your company run from? If your company is run from here, well, you're in trouble. I will tell y'all a story because, we're friends and I can tell y'all small stories and I'll change the name. Bob Smith, because, that's a real name. Bob Smith and his wife moved here. They called me one day and said, hey, we're looking for French tax assistance and U.S. tax assistance. I said, okay, cool, Bob. What do you do? I'm a stay-at-home dad. Cool. What does your wife do? Oh, she runs a $3.5 billion company out of the United States. And where do you live? Oh, we live on the Seine. When did you move? Last year. And who's operating this company? She is, as CEO of this company. I nearly had a heart attack for Bob Smith because I was like, holy gosh, Bob Smith, you and your wife may have put this company into jeopardy of having a portion of your $3.5 billion company be taxable in France. And that led to about $50,000 of legal fees and consulting fees and whatnot from that simple phone call. But basically, long story short, from your question, you have a company in the U.S., you may have permanent establishment risk. The French tax authorities are not stupid. They may come back and tax you. I'll add, may is the big word, but again, if your company is a $50,000 company, may not a big risk. I call this the mannequin issue. You go into a store, you got a mannequin. If the mannequin's holding a Post-it like this, you're not going to see it. So basically, if you have a small company, the mannequin, you're not going to see it that well. If you have a $3.5 billion company, you're flipping holding up a big poster saying, "Come get me." So again, it really depends on facts and circumstances. But in that circumstance, if you have a U.S. company, you may not. There's planning. Everything comes back to planning. Taxes is simply. And when I start any tax presentation for people who are going to ask me, they're always going to ask me, in my situation, what happens? The answer is always, it depends. If a tax guy doesn't say it depends about 15 times in a tax conversation, it's not a real tax conversation. But basically, you have to do proper tax planning, and it has to be proper facts and circumstances before you come.
Jonathan, we're going to give everybody a bathroom break.
Yes.
If you want more details on that, it's more interesting if you look up Shakira's file down in Spain.
Yes.
You guys, I know you had a morning. They had a free morning today.
Seconds until it's actually live in there.
No, you're live now.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh, you're gonna come front row to heckle.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, I have to turn on my mic. Is it on?
There you go.
Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Brian Dunhill with Dunhill Financial, and if it weren't for Brian Dunhill, I would not be standing here today, and I'll let him explain that.
I get to explain.
Yes.
So first of all, I don't think that both Jonathan and Adrian spent enough time introducing themselves, because if you go on IMDb, you're going to find Miss Adrian Leeds, the star, and you're going to see even more of that coming out. She is the predominant real estate agent for all Americans over here. And if you meet any Americans over here, they all know her, they all love her. Jonathan changed laws for us. He's fixed so many things for us. So you've gotten some of the best and the brightest there. So now you guys just get to heckle me and you get to have fun, and we can make this as interactive as possible, because they covered all the most important material in here. So have fun.
I love your.
That's the other introduction.
So snazzy.
You gotta have more flash when you don't have as much substance. Yep, that's the presentation. Good night.
Okay. How about that?
We're gonna skip the regulatory disclosures because you're students instead of advisors or such. So this is actually what Jonathan was talking about earlier, in the effect that.
Wait! What's that?
Don't. You can turn off the volume. Turn off the volume. I'll explain it. It's not loud enough to be able to. Okay. So essentially, what we've had over the course of time is we've had 3 major regulations that have changed everything in the world, and everything's been blamed on FATCA. You might have heard of FATCA if it wasn't for about an hour ago. But essentially, everybody's blaming FATCA, which, as I described earlier, is that video camera that's actually catching the other 3 big rules that are going on. The Obama administration approved FATCA. It was in the works well before that, but it's easy to point fingers at it. So they look at how you're actually declaring your taxes. That all happened in 2010. It went into place in 2011, and everybody's been complaining about it since. So, the hand will catch up 2 things. So, we have our friend Ronald Reagan. Right? So this is where he introduced PFIX. We were talking about the Cayman Islands earlier. Back then, everybody was offshoring all their money into fake companies over in the Cayman Islands, so they approved PFIX.
This means if you buy a regular investment that they'd have here in France, it will be considered a PFIC and you'll be paying significant taxes back in the States on it. We go back to Nixon. We already talked about Nixon earlier. And back then, basically, people were tossing all their money into Liechtenstein and Switzerland. So they put into place a rule that you'd have to report any foreign bank accounts over $10,000. And they didn't inflation adjust it. So it was $10,000 back then, and it's $10,000 now. Back then, $10,000 was a big deal. Nowadays, most people have $10,000 in their bank accounts, so they're having to report all of their accounts all over the world. And then you go all the way back to the origination of the problems for American expats, and it really goes back to Honest Abe. During the Civil War, essentially, all the Americans were moving up to Canada, moving back to England, and they needed to pay for the war. So what did Honest Abe do? He went ahead and put in a citizens-based taxation. And just like most other forms of taxes, they put it into place, and they forgot to ever repeal it. So these are the major problems that we have as American expats, which is why I was saying earlier that there's absolutely no reason to repeal FATCA, because the problems would still be in place. We'd still have citizens-based taxation, we'd still have to report all of our foreign accounts, and we'd still have to go ahead and basically be punished for owning any foreign investments, which is the entire reason for my firm and Jonathan's firm and, well, Adrian's firm of helping Americans navigate their way through these types of things. You can find the entire YouTube on our, the entire video on our YouTube. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to skip this portion because we don't need to delve twice into it because Jonathan did such a tremendous job, but interject if you'd like to. I'm going to go straight to the banking and investment accounts. So if you can go down a few, if you don't mind, and we'll then talk about currencies and such. We'll skip a few because you've already covered FATCA and FBARs and such. If it doesn't have a comic, we'll skip it. Go more and more. So let's go directly into currency exposures. So a lot of finance majors in here, so you know, hopefully you know how the semblance of a investment account should look, right? If any of you are on Betterment or a robo-advisor back in the States? Or have a brokerage account? Any of the accounts, Schwab, Fidelity, etc. What you're probably going to find is if you look through it, you're going to find that the majority of your investments are probably American. Now, anybody have a clue if you took all of the market caps of all the companies around the world, what percentage of them would be American-based? Any guesses? 25%. That's a little low. It's a little higher than that.
48.
That was about 10 years ago, so we're at 57% of the world's market cap, if we take all the companies around the world, are American. All right? Doesn't matter if you go to Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, any of the banks, the major banks, you're probably going to have 85% of your investments inside of an American investment. Now, that's great when you're American because you want to hedge to the dollar. You're going to spend dollars. That's what you're using. But if you're an American that's here in France, you're buying your baguettes in euros. You're here in Europe, you're spending euros. So if you're hedged to the dollar, that might work for you and might work against you. So we'll talk a little bit about PPI. Have you guys heard of PPI? Purchasing Power Index? So most of you have probably heard of the satirical version that The Economist came out with back in the 70s, which is the Big Mac Index. So what is the Big Mac Index? Let's go to the next page. So satirically, what The Economist did was they came out with this index and they figured out that basically every Big Mac had to be made up of a little bit of bread, a little bit of meat, a little bit of cheese, tomato, lettuce, etc.
None of which is edible, but anyway.
Well, but it lasts forever, you know. And they compared the values of Big Macs across the world. And they just use this as a precursor to say, what are the PPI numbers going to come out to be? So in other words, what countries are expensive and what countries are cheap when it compares to what their currencies are worth. And just what you expected, developing world countries ended up having a little bit more expensive Big Mac than any place else. Switzerland has historically been the most expensive.
Of course.
Is that the case?
Because it's the best.
Are you still paying like $15 for a Big Mac?
I'm a vegan, but sure.
I think they do have a vegan burger, but
no, Burger King.
Oh,
Burger King is my favorite.
apologies. What are you paying for a Big Mac back in the States? $6? So double over in Switzerland. I think you're paying closer to $10 over here in most European countries.
Brian, doesn't your chart say how much?
Yeah, but my eyes are deceiving me right here.
I can't see.
Yeah, you're looking at $6 in Canada and the United States, and then
what is it in France?
Yeah, I can't see that. Sorry, it's too small of a rendering, but yeah, it's just a little bit more expensive.
Big Mac menu is $14.30.
14th, I said 15. I was pretty close.
Wow.
So, essentially, this came out in the 1970s, and we still use it every 6 months. Still satirically, but it's just an easier way to explain that what you get with a dollar is going to be different from every single country, and how we're going to be using different currencies. So now I'll break down a little bit from country to country if we go to the next slide. How we're thinking about our overall exposure. We want to go ahead and, actually that's a bad order, I'm sorry, go to the next one. I apologize. How we're thinking about the US dollar is not that the dollar is all-time king, okay? The main reason why, does everybody know the history of the dollar, first of all? After World War II, basically everybody got together, and they got together at Bretton Woods, and they came up to a consensus that everything would be pegged. So it didn't matter if you had a Deutschmark, a franc, so those were the old currencies of Germany and France, or a US dollar. They had preset prices that they would go to each other with, right? So these lasted all the way until the 1970s. Going back onto Nixon. Nixon came into place. Now, do you guys know when the last time that Fort Knox was audited? Something in the 1950s. How much gold is in there? Who knows? It's not been audited. I'm not saying that there's not gold in there. I'm just saying it hasn't been audited since the 1950s. And the French came out and they said, hey, here's a bunch of dollars. Can we have some gold? And we had to give it to them because we were pegged. And they took a little bit more, and we took a little bit more, until Nixon came out and he said, we are no longer pegging. We're no longer honoring the Bretton Woods Agreement. And so guess what happened? The dollar went down a whole bunch because it was no longer pegged to the dollar, or to gold. So the 1970s is really the true beginning of a free-moving currency. So when we're looking at the renminbi in China, when we're looking at all these foreign currencies that don't have free-floating currencies, we've only had a free-floating currency for 50 years. So now you had a period of a good 10 years where essentially the dollar was going down. Now what happened at the end of the 1970s? We had mass inflation, right? Now what did we have last year? Mass inflation, right? Take care of all that inflation. He raised interest rates. What did Powell do last year with interest rates? So there we go. We have some parallels. We're going back to the 1980s last year. And basically, he had to raise rates. They got up to 20%, right? Adrian, you probably remember some of those times where we had huge interest rates in the 1980s?
The 80s I don't remember, but no, the late 90s when I tried to buy my apartment here, the rates were over 9% in the U.S.
There you go. So remember earlier we were talking about 3.5% interest rates? Imagine triple that, right? We got up to 20% in the United States. If all of a sudden you have really high interest rates, what do you think that does to our currency? What do you think high interest rates do to your currency rate?
Increase it.
Yeah, because it's more attractive. Because you want to invest. What do you want to earn, 20%, or do you want to borrow at 20%? You want to earn at 20%. So the dollar went up for a good decade. So if we keep going down the line, keep going down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
I got distracted.
Now, mid-'80s, Plaza Accords. Do you guys hear each year when we have these big protests because there's a G7 summit or G6 summit? Back then it was the G5. That was the first one. The Plaza Accords were in New York City. Do you know what happened in that room?
Sign some papers.
Well, Ronald Reagan came out publicly and he said, hey, you guys need to quit selling off our currency. Right? You need to quit basically owning all the US dollars over there, which is bringing us down. Or I'm sorry, pushing us up. And publicly, the French, the Germans, the Italians, what do they all say?
Screw you.
Why would we do that? This is great, right? We're getting 20% interest. They go behind closed doors, and guess what happens? They form a union, which is now the G7. We never know what goes on behind those closed doors. But America gave some major concessions, because guess what? The dollar came back under control. Which, what do we want? Do we want a weak dollar or a strong dollar? Depends if we're buyers or sellers, right? It depends on the times. So, notice, you can read through all of these, but the establishment is every 10 to 15 years we have a strong dollar and then a weak dollar. Politically, that's the important part. Now, let's go to the next page, if you don't mind. Here, you're going to see most of your guys' lifetimes, great financial crisis, Eurozone crisis, and then COVID-19.
Wasn't that 2008?
It began in 2007.
Thanks.
So as a Floridian, essentially, if you go down to the Depression, what ends up happening is the Sandbelt states got hit first, right? So Florida real estate got demolished, then U.S. real estate, and then the stock market. 2007, the Sandbelt states, which included Phoenix and all these other places, Vegas. 2008, it hit the whole country, and then the stock market in 2008. So yes, it's where the starting point is, but you know, as a Floridian, I'm going to consider it a little bit sooner than you might because it would have affected us sooner. The importance is each of these were global events. They might have been regionalized at certain places, but what happens when you have some sort of disaster? If you own Turkish lira, right? Or if you own pesos, most of the different pesos, where do you want your money during a global crisis?
Sweden.
That's one of them. You want it someplace safe, right? You want someplace stable. You don't want it in a highly fluctuating currency. So there's always a flight to safety. So let's go on to the next page and I'll get what the flight to safety is. The flight to safety, back in, what was this, 2007, 2008, essentially these strong PPIs, remember the Big Mac index? You had your Canadian loonie is the currency, right? I still haven't looked up the origin of that, but I love it. The Australian dollar, the US dollar, the Swiss franc, the British pound, Swedish krona, and the Norwegian crown, right? These were considered the safe currencies. Commodity market, commodity market, commodity market, commodity market, the leading currency of the world. Some old things from pre-1940s that I won't disclose anymore to that. Then you flash forward a little bit further. Let's go to the next slide. And essentially, we had a commodity shock in 2014. So where does safe money go? Well, same places, but minus Australia and Canada, right? Oil was still strong, so Sweden and Norway stayed up there. Why Sweden stays up there when it's not an exporter of oil, I still don't understand, but that's the rationale behind it. Then you have Brexit on the next slide, and guess what? The pound falls off, right? We've had a 30% decline in the pound since Brexit. That was a brilliant idea, wasn't it? So now you have a flight of capital to 4 countries whenever we have a disaster. COVID hits, everybody in the world has gone to the US dollar, Swiss franc, Norwegian crown, and the Swedish krona, right? How many cuckoo clocks can you buy with all the world's money? There's no safe places, so it all seeps to the US dollar. So we historically always have a 10 to 15 year flight into safe places with money, and then a 10 to 15 year period where it dissipates out. Why? Because America would prefer to have a weaker currency rather than a stronger currency. You like having a stronger currency when you're coming over here and you're buying a café crème, right? But you don't necessarily want to have it when you're sitting there trying to sell things to the Europeans. So this is why currencies become very important. If we're talking on a macro basis, this is significant. If you're talking about your retirement life, now all of a sudden we need to make sure we have our investments in the currencies of where we're going to need the money, because otherwise it can act against us for a good 10 to 15 year period. Let's go on beyond this. So as individuals, we can look at 5 different ways of actually hedging these. We can do future contracts, forward contracts, options, and swaps. Now these are all derivatives that are mechanisms are better for companies that are needing to go ahead and hedge shorter term risks. An individual that might be buying a house next year or the year after and they don't want to see the currency swings affect them. Essentially, those are great tools to be able to manage that. But if you're doing that over 10 or 15 years, like we were talking about that risk, this becomes expensive. It's going to cost you 1 to 2% to do per annum. And all of a sudden, if you're doing that over 15, 20 years, that's going to hinder all of your performance. Ask anybody that's been trying to do the Japan trade for the last 20 years, right? They get it wrong because every time they get the stock market right, Japan hit all-time highs yesterday. Well, guess what? Yen's near all-time lows, right? So you're counterbalancing it. If you're doing it in euros or dollars, you're basically hurting and hindering yourself on these 4 if you're doing it long-term. It's a hedge. A hedge, unlike the term hedge fund, means you're hedging your risk, right? So it works on that short-term basis. Oh,
you want me to go
no,
back?
it works, because all I was going to say was the last one is natural hedging. So this is a mechanism of actually investing in where you're going to need the funds. Now, as I asked you earlier, the United States makes up 57% of the world's companies. France makes up 3%. Now, the misnomer would be we've got to turn the blue all the way into the yellow piece, because that's what we want to go ahead and have our money into. But everybody know what the Magnificent Seven are? You've got your Apple, your Google, your Amazon, NVIDIA, right? So you got your main tech companies out there. Do you guys know how much of their revenue comes from abroad? 60%, 60. You take the rest of the S&P 500, 40% of their revenue comes from abroad, right? So if we're buying a tech company, actually, we have more exposure to foreign currency than we do the US dollar. So buying stocks that are in different countries doesn't change things. It could change our sector allocation. But you guys know what fixed income is, right? Right, so if you have your bonds, if we start buying US bonds, now what did US bonds do last year? Anybody follow the bond market? Okay, as finance majors, you guys got to start following the bond market, because the most famous quote in the bond market is, if I could come back as a bond, I could petrify everybody. And this is why you should be petrified by the bond market. These can swing. They can go bankrupt or whatever. Last year, the bond market declined by 20%, right? That's a big movement. That's even before you start talking currencies. So all of a sudden, if you're down 20% and the currency is down on top of that, you could be looking at equity-like losses in a bad year. But now, if you're buying into Euro bonds, you've eliminated all that currency risk, right? We have 10 to 15 year swings on currencies. So if you have a 15-year period where you're saying, hey, Adrian, don't worry, your account's going to come back, just wait years, you're going to be kind of upset with me, right? You're not going to be as patient with it. So all of a sudden, we have to think differently. And when we come back to how Betterment does it, or how Schwab or Fidelity does it, they're buying 85% of your overall portfolio in US dollars. We're looking at the opposite. We're looking at basically having the majority of all the fixed income being in euros, because that's where you're going to buy your baguette. When it comes to the equities, we make the mix that's based on the volatility that we want in the overall portfolio. So we break off all of our portfolios based on the regions that they're in. So we work in Europe in a big way, in the UK, and then we have our USD models. Because if we have an American that's here in France, but they're going to retire back in the US, we want to put them in our US model. If we have an American that's living here in Europe, they're going to go in our Euro model. The UK, a little bit different because we have all kinds of rules that they can only invest in certain things. Otherwise, they're going to be taxed at their full rates. So we have to be careful over there. So you can see the amount that we're investing in North America shifts based on which model we're in for each of those. And that's just that natural currency hedge. It's the way to minimize the cost by not having to use those derivatives, but instead we're using where the actual instrument's held. I won't take you through core plus. You guys know core plus satellite, right? Okay. Core plus satellite. You guys know strategic allocation. The baseline in your pie chart, right? So the pie chart really works, you know, if we're talking about 30 years ago, back in the 1980s, when you could get 7-8% on a bond. That was wonderful. Buy a mix of stocks and bonds, hold that, rebalance it, and just reset it each and every year. The problem is, if you have extremely low interest rates, why on earth would you want to own a 30-year bond? Remember, if interest rates go up, the value of your bond goes down. And if you have the fulcrum, the further you are from the fulcrum, the more it's going to swing. So all of a sudden, if you have more risk of it going up than going down, if you own shorter term bonds, you have less risk of loss, right? So now all of a sudden, if you're running a core plus satellite portfolio, you're basically saying, here's the strategic allocation in the middle. So ours, we decide our strategic allocation is 80%. That's what's called the core. The outside are the satellites. Now this could be avoiding certain investments that would be in the strategic allocation that have too much risk for the overall model. So these could be those 30-year bonds. These could be certain currencies. I was talking about Japan earlier, that I've never figured out how to actually invest properly in Japan. So essentially, we just avoid it. We take it out as one of those satellites. So up to 20% of it can be satellites where we're making tactical decisions. It's avoiding risk instead of just trying to always go after profit. That model has outperformed the strategic allocation for the last 20 years. It should be part of, if any of you are going to work in any wealth management firm or any investment bank, that should be part of your vocabulary because everybody's doing it, just a lot of people don't know the terms for it. And we make cartoons about it. Now, if you're talking to financial advisors over here, all of you know what a financial advisor is, right? Perfect. Now, over here, financial advisors are looked at in a little bit different way. When I started my career, financial advisors were graded just below used car salesmen on the credibility chart. Over here, it still is that level.
Worse than real estate agents?
No, everybody loves their real estate agent because they find them a beautiful property. The key of how they became more respected in America are the keys of what you want to make sure you're asking the questions of. First of all, are they fiduciaries? Do you guys know what fiduciaries are? Always sitting on the same side of the table as you, basically getting the same side of the transaction in everything. So they look at things from your vantage point instead of just from their own vantage point. They're not commission-based in any way, shape, or form. That is an American concept, even though it's a Latin word. So they don't have such thing as fiduciaries over here. So if you're registered back in the States, you can do that. We are registered back in the States, and we apply everything from the fiduciary rules over here in Europe. Paying and receiving commissions is a big part that essentially changes everything. You go to one of the bankers here in France, if you buy investments, you're still paying an upfront load, annual service fees, and you might be paying a fee to them as well. So you can see some hefty fees going on in there. Whereas if you have to be a fiduciary, you're actually representing exactly what your fees are and you're receiving fees from nobody else except for the ultimate client. America is very fee conscious. France, not so much when it comes to banking because there's a lot hidden. The European Union is trying to change these, but I did an analysis of all the American expat firms. There's 83 of us in London alone, right? There's only 5 firms that basically do it as their main business, us being one of them. When I broke down those 83 firms, the highest annual fee for any of those firms was 2.8% per annum, right? I'd have a nicer boat if I was charging 2.8%. The average was 1.24. American firms only average 1%. This is why they say for financial advisors, find a niche. Well, no, I'd say first find an Adrian, then find a niche. Essentially, you're able to charge a premium if you're in that upper bracket of being able to say, I'm a specialist in this. And the American expat space is definitely one of those. So 25 basis points more, or 300 basis points, gets expensive. Now, there's an anomaly in there, and I'll explain what that is later. Make sure they're regulated by the SEC. Now, considering all the news, you might think of the SEC as the guys that got hacked on their X account. I nearly said Twitter. And the guys that actually approved the Bitcoin ETF, because that's all the news that we've been seeing in the last day. But essentially, you want to make sure anybody's regulated through the SEC, because that keeps everything on the US side protected. You want them to be regulated here in Europe. We have a blue sky regime just like America does. If you're regulated in one country, you can do business in all the others as long as you register in that country. We have the same thing still in America, that basically you just have to apply to register in those different countries. We're going to make sure they don't sell PFICs, so keeping the investments in the States like Jonathan was precluding to, essentially makes your taxes, or makes the double taxation treaty the bee's knees. And you can look up all of my skeletons in the closet on the SEC's website. So you can find out if there's any past regulatory issues. And you'll find that there's a lot of people, a lot of companies that deal with a lot of those. Those are the main questions that somebody should be asking when they're doing things. Don't worry, I was finished with it.
Okay.
So this is when it becomes odd, because earlier, Jonathan was talking about how many banks don't want to deal with Americans when they're over here, and those are the investment institutions. I would say that based on the rules, the French banks are actually doing most Americans a favor by not taking them in. But many American firms don't want to deal with France. So you have to navigate those worlds. For instance, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, all the major institutions. You say you're moving to France, they'll say, nope, you have to close your account or move it someplace else. So there's only select firms that actually deal with Americans in France, and it's mostly because most entities have a license here in France, they have a license in the States. If they melange those two licenses, everything that they do in America is privy to the French regulators. Same thing vice versa. Now for Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch, that's a big deal. Do you think Merrill Lynch wants the French authorities to walk in to the United States and say, give us access to everything? No, I already told you earlier. America is the biggest offshore banking capital in the world, right? So these banks aren't stupid. They have a separate entity. They deal with everybody but Americans here in France. And they have an American entity. That way, the regulators, parfait, merci beaucoup. That way, essentially, they don't have to worry about the regulators coming in, etc., and saying, well, no, we have access to this. We're allowed to access all of this, right? Why do I not care about that? 100% of my clients are Americans that are over here. The French regulators want to look at it? Yeah, they're privy to, because we're regulated over here, and all of our clients are doing that type of business. Same thing with the American authorities. So this is why there's so few platforms that are willing to deal with Americans in that kind of way. But you have to be careful, because you want to make sure you're getting your IRS compliant products, and the most important thing, the 1099, so that Jonathan doesn't have to spend hours and hours trying to figure it out from the statements. Let's be honest, the brains and the are going to deal with that instead of Jonathan.
Sure. Next.
So our portfolios break down into, like I was saying, the 3 currencies, and then we have 6 different risk profiles, from conservative all the way down to aggressive. So we break those down, And we've broken down a little bit different model if we go to the next slide, where, I'm sorry, one more. Sorry, I'm boring them. So we now have a multifaceted business, which is essentially we knew that there was more people that had a need now than before, and it used to be a high net worth business. You guys know the Tesla business plan, right? First go high end, then go low end, right? Any company that tries to go low end and then go high end doesn't work. So until just recently, the biggest Chinese electric vehicle company was a company called NIO. They went low end, tried to go high end. What did they fail at? Getting high end. They sell cheap cars. That's why most of you probably don't know it, right? Now, essentially, we did the same thing. We started a high net worth business. We worked with high net worth clients that needed access to these types of things. If somebody didn't have $500,000, we just couldn't put the time into it. Now, what we've expanded into is an institutional business and now a robo-advisor. So we now have a business segment that anybody can open an account that's an American here in France or any place else around the world. Somehow Germany's not included. It's a regulatory thing we're trying to get around. But you can go in there, no minimum, and it's half the price. It's 50 basis points. But it's just like Betterment back in the States or Nutmeg in the UK, that an American can access the platforms and they get a low fee for a low service. So no American can actually complain about, nobody will bank with me, because it's right there. Now, my goal with this in the next 2 years is to get the price point down to the same price as Betterment, so that they don't just say, it's more expensive. The good news is, we've already gotten to the same level as Nutmeg, which is the UK one, at 45 basis points. So we're no more expensive than a Brit getting onto the same platform with the company that JP Morgan owns. We've got 20 basis points more to go to get to the same level as Betterment. But now every American is going to get that access point. I was telling you earlier, there's 83 companies that are regulated to deal with Americans in the UK. This is what we're going to continue to see. More and more individuals finding the niche, the business, because the number of Americans since I met Adrian that live in Europe, this was just published a couple months ago in The Economist, has doubled in the last decade. Now,
France issued 50% more visas this year than last year.
Yep. Now, I tend to think that it's more than just political. I think people blame the politics, but it's something that we've been talking about for 40, 50 years. Demographics. We had the biggest boom in births right after World War II. And that generation's getting to retirement. And when they're getting to retirement, well, wait a second, they don't have a job anymore. Maybe their kids have moved out of the state. Why not move to France? And plus, I hate the politics that are going on back in the States, so I'll blame that as well. I've seen that as one of the biggest reasons of people moving. I grew up in Belgium. We've had 13,000 Americans in Belgium for 40 years. It fluctuates by about 100. But if you look at what they're made up of, it used to be all middle managers, right? They used to all be, kind of 40-somethings that were sent over there because they were MBAs and they knew how to run a company the right way, right? Nowadays, there's MBA programs all around the world, so they don't have to pay somebody double to come over to Belgium. Students, retirees in Belgium. But the numbers stayed the same. But the number of Americans abroad has doubled. So they've all come because of Adrian down here.
It's all my fault.
So alter your business plan over the course of time. We now have 3 business segments, and my primary business segment is actually the smallest part of my overall business. This is growing to be the biggest. Skip that, they don't want to see that. A couple resources to have fun with. You guys will actually get this presentation afterwards. American Citizens Abroad, so this is an advocacy services. So on all of these things that, I don't have time like Jonathan does to spend on those types of things, Mary Louise does those types of things for us, and they advocate.
Send you to the AARO website, not the DCA website? Just for fun.
They're both incredible organizations.
Different organizations
I will
each
not
other.
I will not bash either one of them. I just happen to sit on their committee. So, and
And I
you
sit on their
are you the head of the tax committee? Yeah. So,
And these organizations exist because we have no direct representation in the United States as expatriates.
yeah.
Basically.
So it's kind of like Washington D.C., right? Taxation, no representation.
Exactly.
A couple more for you. This is a copy of our American Expat Guide, so it goes through the entire aspect of being an American abroad, all the things that you should be thinking about. So some nice reading material. We talk a lot about PFIX. I don't expect anybody to trust me about PFIX because I'm not an accountant. I'm not as smart as Jonathan, so that's why I give references to other people's websites on their views on PFIX and why you should avoid them. I was telling you earlier you can find out all of the skeletons in the closet of any financial advisor. That's exactly where you can get them. So if you have any friends in the financial services industry, look them up. Double taxation agreements. You heard Jonathan talk about it being the bee's knees. I did a control F. I couldn't find that in there. We dig deep into the double taxation agreements, and in most countries, you can have between 1 and 3. There's only 70 double taxation agreements with the United States. It's about that. 200 countries around the world, depending on which tally. So only 70 of them have a double taxation treaty. So if you see that there's typically a lot of Americans that go to certain places, it's because of that, because they understand the tax code. Do you know where the most Americans are abroad? This is a trick question.
Mexico.
Yes. Yes. Mostly dual registrants. So Mexican Americans went up to America, moved back to Mexico later on. That's the whole conspiracy theory that basically congressional members could be part of both Mexico's parliament and the U.S. Senate, and therefore one could annex the other. It's a great conspiracy theory. Yeah. But there's 3 different kinds of double taxation treaties. The one, which is the one that Jonathan talked about in depth, is the most important while you're there. But estate taxes are separate, and there's no double taxation agreement when it comes to estate taxes. So there's a couple countries that have one, like Belgium and France have one. And Belgium has one with Sweden, but Sweden doesn't have an estate tax, which makes absolutely no sense. Which is exactly why I don't do double taxation treaties, because most of them don't make sense to me. The third one's a totalization agreement, and the totalization agreement has everything to do with Social Security. So you can wrap up certain Social Security between different countries. So it's a lot of information. It's all on the IRS website, so you don't have to read it in a foreign language, and it goes into each of the different countries. There's the bit on totalization agreements so that you can get some of the different benefits there. So you can hop around from country to country, and that doesn't preclude you from being able to receive benefits from those countries. So if you're like us and nomads, what are you on your 4th country, 5th country? 5th country. Essentially, you can take advantage of the totalization agreements without having to wait until you have all of the credits for those countries. Residency-based taxation. You were asking earlier about FATCA, whether they should repeal FATCA. No, I believe that they should basically go to a residency-based taxation system. Now, this is
Never
far-fetched.
gonna happen.
It's far-fetched, but the thing is, this is an opportunity to fix it in the correct way. So we shouldn't be bitching about FATCA. We should be bitching about citizens-based taxation, which has been the problem for a longer period of time. Both AARO, Adrian Leeds Group, ACA, and my firm are founding members of the Residency-Based Taxation Coalition. But these are the things that we should be going out after. And to me, the most important part, I couldn't remember if you guys were an initial member.
Oh no, we probably were a founding member.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
We were a pushy member.
A pushy member. A pushy.
Probably just followed.
Wow. Oh yeah, of course.
Would switching to far-fetched, but would switching to a residence-based model, wouldn't it mean less tax revenue for the U.S. government?
So the entire basis of the residency-based taxation regimen is to make it revenue neutral. So in other words, you have to try to find ways to change how those systems would work. The amount of tax, I can't remember the amount of tax. You know, you're part of the better organization per you, so therefore you probably have this data. No, the amount of revenue that they get from foreigners is minimal. And if I remember correctly, I might be completely off on this. It's a majority, something like 90% of Americans that live abroad don't actually file their taxes. And some of them, it's not because they need to. A lot of them are students, so they might not have income. But the thing is, I'm not saying there's a number that I could say need to. I think it was like 490,000 Americans overseas actually filed their taxes, and most estimates are that there's like 6 or 7 million American expats. Well, I don't know how many of those people should have that didn't, if you see what I'm saying, but 500,000 when you're talking about a country of 350 million is de minimis. And so it's figuring out how to get rid of
The
it.
tax can't be that much considering the tax treaty.
There's a few that would pay the bulk of the taxes of that 500,000. I mean, Jonathan probably, fills the whole coffers right there. So that's the basis of this, is how do you position it to congressional members to make it so that it's revenue neutral, so that you can actually not necessarily just remove the tax burden, but remove the burden of reporting requirements. Because most Americans over here, they're not overcome by taxes, especially here in France. If they're working here in France, or if they're retired here in France, they're probably paying more tax here, or they want to pay the tax in America. So it's not a problem. But essentially, it's the amount of time that they have to spend with Jonathan on tax things instead of just enjoying life, being le bon vivant like you can with
the
Jonathan.
IRS must spend a lot more time and energy on tax returns that they don't really need to be doing.
I don't know. They let go of, what was it, 10,000 IRS agents or something like that in the last couple of years. So I don't know if they're spending time on much of anything.
Well, yeah.
It's mostly automated. So, this is my core team, and well, I open it up to questions. Yeah.
Did you start designing the app after the big explosion of AI back in?
We started designing DF Direct back in 5 years ago, so 2019, and the main reason was to reinvent the company. When we started the company, we were just a basic finance company. We were just dealing with people in cross-border issues. Then we figured out that we had to be more of a hospitality company. We had to do things a little bit different, to present them in the French ways, to present them in the ways that are culturally sensitive, because even though my core demographic are Americans, the majority of Americans that are definitely going to be here for a lifetime are either married to somebody else or they're accidental Americans like Adrian was talking about. So we evolved to being a hospitality firm, but now we have 1,039 clients. I can't deal with 1,039 clients personally on a daily basis. So what happens? Well, you have to automate
they all
functions.
want to, though.
Sometimes not. If you can get things to the people in the order that they want to, then essentially they're happy with it. If I think back at the beginning of my career, if I sat down with a client, I had to ask them every question. Where do you live? Oh, how do you spell that? Et cetera, et cetera. If I send you a link and I say, hey, can you fill out all your personal information? Do you see that as bad customer service or just a faster, more efficient way, right? That's how our minds have clicked and changed over the last 20, 30 years, to where you can use technology as not a hindrance on service, but instead an improvement on service. Are we out of time? That's
It's
fine,
6 o'clock.
Because they're out of questions.
I'm just here to say.
The timekeeper has spoken.
I mean, if you want to continue, it's okay with us, right, Brian?
Absolutely. Do you have a question?
It's not related to the presentation, but I was just wondering what happened to your head.
Yeah.
Which
Sorry,
happens what?
I actually didn't have the Band-Aid on Tuesday, and it looked like a bullet hole. So it was really I slipped
We
on,
whacked him, is what
yeah,
happened.
pretty much. Yeah. No, I just slipped on the boat and hit a corner on the boat, and it looked worse than it is.
He's stirring it up.
Which coast?
Which coast? It's on the Solent in England. Yeah. On
It's
the cold
coming,
coast.
though. It's
On the
coming to
cold
France
coast.
soon.
The Bay of Biscayne is the most dangerous place you can sail in the world at this time of year. So Jonathan keeps telling me I have to bring it down here. Bay of Biscayne, so between the UK and Portugal.
Gascogne in French.
Ouais, mais ça c'est différent, ils sont anglais. Ils sont américains, c'est...
It won't.
Ouais.
Yeah, I'll just turn it off.
What else do we have?
Other questions?
Where are you guys going for dinner?
Where should we go?
Oh, she's the one that asked where to go.
In this neighborhood?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this neighborhood, if you walk out the door and you go to your right, you'll see a red awning, Chez Omar, which is an institution. It's Moroccan food, so couscous and grilled meats and fish. Very good, not expensive. If you continue down the street, on the left is a cafe called Café Charlot. It is the hippest cafe in the neighborhood, okay? And the food's very good. If you go, there's a street right there. If you go down the street, on the next corner is Madame Sean. It's a really good Thai restaurant, so if you're interested in Asian. The food here, there's always the cafe here and the cafe across the street. And let me think, where else would I recommend? Well, that you can get into.
Yeah,
right
you've
now.
got a big crowd right here, so.
Anyway, that gives you a few choices, right?
Please,
You can think of another one?
yeah, can you, no, I was just reminding you to pay your second offering downstairs.
Oh yeah, when you leave, you go downstairs and the register at the left, the cashier on the left, that's Angelique. Just tell her what you had and pay her.
Yeah. And maybe disperse, don't go as a big mob because...
Well, they'll be in a line is
I'm
what will
sorry,
happen.
you know, but it's so hard for me to tell them where to go with the bars and restaurants because there's so many.
Because there's so many.
Yeah, I mean, you know that.
Okay, but if you go into Omar, you tell him I sent you. If you go into Café Charlot, you tell him I sent you.
Say Adrian.
Well, okay, so before, thank you, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And on behalf of the Carlson School of Management, we just want to give you a little token
Aw.
of appreciation
Oh,
for
that's
coming
sweet.
out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This will be a tough one to navigate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, wait. We can take this down because we're done.
Pizza place in Dinkytown still open that does the
Oh, thank you.
Makes it easy. Oh, jeez.
Wow.
I can't believe I'm in Paris and I'm dreaming of mac and cheese pizza.
Up, up, up.
Hey, always been